you're all here, and it's an early morning, and thanks for turning out. Just want to give you, my name's Carol Gray. I'm a Fulbright Scholar at Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability, and I'm going to give you a few nuts and bolts about how this symposium will work. First, I want to thank the Political Science Department for letting us use this wonderful room. And also thank you to the videographer. The Provost's office is sponsoring the videographer for one day, and Fulbright Canada is covering the videographer for the next day. Also, many thanks to Dan Suazo and Rosemary Shada from Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability. They are amazing motivators and activists and scholars, and this conference is largely due to their work. Also, many thanks to the students who have helped so much. We have a lot of students who are involved with moderating panels and with registering people and putting up signs, and the students have been wonderful. This morning we've had helpers. Marion is out there registering. Marion Pinsky has been wonderful with logistics and background, and brings her many conference skills to this symposium. Okay, I also want to tell you a couple things about how the symposiums will work. So we will have two panels this morning following Frank Chalk's keynote address, and then tomorrow we will have three panels. Remember, tomorrow the symposium is at Loyola College. For those of you who are new to Montreal, you will have a yellow shuttle pass that you can use for the shuttle that's right outside this building that will take you to Loyola College. It runs every 15 minutes, and the conference starts at 9 tomorrow. Also, as you know, there are field trips in the afternoon, and I know many of you have registered online. We'll also be circulating this sign-up sheet, so if you could just confirm that you're still going on the field trips that you signed up for, or if you didn't sign up online, please feel free to sign up now. There's room in each of the field trips, and we're happy to have you attend. In terms of logistics for getting to field trips, you can either meet us at the locations, and if you go to your guide for speakers, which is in your booklet, the very back page has the field trip information. So either you can meet us at the location, or you can meet us out front where the shuttle bus is, and we will have a guide to take you to the field trip if it's one of the ones that is a distance away. If it's the Oral History Center, that's just the building across the street, so we're going to let you find your way to that building. Okay. Also, the green roof and the talk on urban beekeeping is not at the Palais des Congrès. We're visiting a different green roof, and that's at Central Paul Roulant, which is located at 111 Roy Street. And again, we'll be having a guide leave from out front to take you there. Oh, actually, that's from the Loyola campus. We'll be leaving from the shuttle bus there to take you there. Okay. Let's see. All right. I do want to mention that the moderator for the second panel is going to be Hannah. Hannah Dolph is a Killam Fellow from Carleton University. She was inspired to come to Canada because she had done work on an Arctic Resource Development Study program in Quebec and in Ottawa. And she's from the University of Washington, but is now at Carleton, and she's studying international studies and law, society, and justice, and she'll be moderating the second panel and introducing our speakers for that. I'm now happy to introduce Rosemary Shada, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. And Ms. Shada published an 8-volume bibliography entitled Gender, Balancing History Towards an Inclusive Curriculum, and this was co-edited with the late Keith Lowther. She is doing work on the social history of a factory town in Hessen, Germany, and she'll be revisiting the German youth movement that she has also written a monograph about, in order to explore connections between the current green German reform movements and those of the Weimar era. She's also been honored with the Outstanding Contribution Award from the Concordia Council on Student Life. And I also, I have the pleasure of working with Rosemary on a daily basis, and I know she did this amazing program in Germany where she took students to learn about cooperative models of sustainability, and it sounds like it was just a terrific program. So we're very happy to have her introduce Frank Chalk and Rosemary.
thank you very much for that lovely and warm introduction, Carol. And thank you also for thanking the people who deserve to be thanked. At the risk of maybe repeating what some of the things you've said, I want to put in a very, very special thank you to our students, especially Marianne Pesky, who I think is still out there, registering student, Maria Raskin, Laura Francois, Edith Gaudreau-Lebel, Andréane Poirier, and Jessica Cabana, and Lisa Gabriela Cleofat. Without the students, we couldn't have done it. I also want to put in a very special thank you to Carol, who I think has been way too modest. She has been an inspiration to us. She has just been a dynamo. We would like to keep her. It's just been wonderful working with you, Carol, and thank you for everything you've done here. Also, I would like to say special thanks to Adan Suazo, the amazing and wonderful assistant at Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability, who again has made all of this possible. Now I'd like to introduce our wonderful keynote speaker, Dr. Frank Chalk, a dear colleague, and also I'm fortunate to call him a very good friend. He is a professor of history. He is a director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies, MIGS, at Concordia. He is extensively published. One of the key works on genocide was published with Kurt Jonasson by Yale. Dr. Chalk and Kurt Jonasson collaborated for many years. It's the history and sociology of genocide. He is an associate editor of the 3-volume Macmillan Reference USA Encyclopedia of Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity, consulting editor of Gale's Genocide and Persecution series, past president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars and the Canadian Association for African Studies. He's been a fellow for the Center of Advanced Holocaust Studies of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, a Fulbright professor, Fulbright people, at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, and has co-authored Mobilizing the Will to Intervene, Leadership to Prevent Mass Atrocities with Romeo Dallaire, Kyle Matthews, and others, published by McGill Queen's University in 2010. I'll just give you a few highlights of his extensive list of publications. He has, for example, Le Service Hongrois de la BBC et le Sauvetage des Juifs de Hongrie in the book La Résistance aux Génocides, which came out in Paris in 2008. In English, as Resisting Genocide, the Multiple Form of Rescue by Columbia University Press in November of 2010. The article, Mass Atrocity Crimes in Darfur and the Response of the Government of Sudan Media to International Pressure in Crisis in Darfur, again, McGill Queen's University. Then he has also written a chapter in Mass Atrocity Crimes, Preventing Future Outrages, Looking Institutions Press in association with the Harvard Kennedy School Program on Interstate Conflict and the World Peace Foundation. His chapter on the responsibility to react, co-authored with Romeo Dallaire and Kyle Matthews, was recently published in the Routledge Handbook of the Responsibility to Protect. In October 2012, he also published Mobilizing the Will to Intervene, the Responsibility to Protect Meets the National Interest, in Joachim Gardemann, Franz Josef Jacobi, and Bernadette Spinning, editors, Humanitäre Hilfe and Staatliche Souveränität. So as you can tell, he is internationally known, internationally published, and he is also very much active in helping to try to stop atrocities before they happen. He has recently been working on training missions in Kyrgyzstan, Uganda, and Poland for the Office of the United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide. In May 2012, he was appointed a member of the Canadian Advisory Council of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and And in November 2012, on the nomination of Senator Romeo Dallaire, the Governor General of Canada awarded Professor Chalk the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in recognition of his work on genocide. We're also very fortunate at Loyola to have him as a fellow of the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability. And thank you very much.
I want to meet this guy. Thank you, Rosemary. So, if I stand up, can you still see what's behind me is a good question. Relate to this. Rosemary Shada, Professor Shada, Professor Peter Stewart, sitting over there, works with the college, are people I love to share things with and work with, as well as Carol, who just did a workshop for us that was terrific on the uprisings in Egypt. It's great to be here. I want to thank Rosemary for inviting me to do this, because it's something I've actually wanted to do for a long time, and I just haven't had the opportunity. With us is Marie Lamanche, who's sitting in the back, who also has worked with Adon. He's worked with us. Marie is the assistant to the director of MIGS, and right now that happens to be me, so I'm a lucky fellow. And I'm going to start my 20 minutes now. You don't have to nudge me as I asked you to do. Okay. So, mass atrocity crimes, I figured this out. Mass atrocity crimes, maybe I'll get out of the way. You can push the button. Okay. Here. Just the right arrow is good. It works. Okay? So, mass atrocity crimes are the overlapping crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, and serious war crimes hit it. And this morning we're going to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, which is the Malthusian theories that tell us that population pressure, and we could plug in other kinds of pressures, are a problem for trying to reduce the probability of mass atrocity crimes. Can you all see me over there? You can't, right? Okay. So, in about 1798 or 96, Malthus unleashed this unresearched study, which the literature tells us he then proceeded to research as he did subsequent editions. But as the evidence that contradicted him piled up, he ignored it, just nitpicked the evidence so that he could strengthen his case. And he is the elephant in the room, because some people conclude rather simplistically that if we have genocides, such as in Rwanda or in East Pakistan in 1971, that must be because of population pressure. We move on. Thomas Homer Dixon here in Canada has done a much more sophisticated interpretation and analysis of how the model could work. And I could spend 20 minutes, which is all I have, looking with you at the various parts of that model. But as you can see, environmental scarcity is the crucial part of it. And it impinges on all of the stabilizing factors that keep societies from going at each other's throats. Ultimately, it produces economic crisis, migration, expulsion. States become more fragile and vulnerable, and in this model, the ultimate social effect are coup d'etat, ethnic conflicts, and what they call deprivation conflicts. So I want to talk to you about several cases of interest, and I'm going to do it very lightly because time is limited and you have many other things to talk about. But I want to call you, there's a bibliography at the end of this, so you can continue your reading. But Séverine Audesserre, who received the African Studies Association Prize for the best book when the year her book appeared, which was about 3 years ago now, who's done a lot of work in the Congo, came to the conclusion that a lot of our interventions, be they military, economic, or diplomatic, are fraught with problems because we ignore the grassroots, basically. And the diplomats who report to us, together with intelligence agencies, et cetera, are so capital-focused that they do top-down analyses, and they actually imagine that their top-down actions affect conditions on the ground that help to prevent or stop civil wars, et cetera, when in fact, most of these wars actually arise from conditions at the bottom and initiators at the bottom who create crises that then spiral upwards into national battles of all sorts. Local conflict resolution is the key, therefore, in Severine's view. And she has a lot of data from the Congo to support that, although she doesn't neglect the fact that there can be inciters and initiators at the national level. But most often, if you're looking for what's causing the trouble in the Congo or in many other countries, it's starting at the level of the hill, the village, the town, the province, and maybe the region, but only spirals up to where we notice it. And often it simmers below for a decade or more when we get big mass atrocities. So these are her main points, and the key are these little questions she asks in this slide. Who will be the chief of each territory under traditional law? Who can control the distribution of land and exploitation of mining sites? Who will be appointed to administrative positions in that area? Localized fighting over these issues is what often escalates into visible national violence. So here's the evidence that in the case of Rwanda, resource deprivation and population pressure may have had a serious impact on the murder of anywhere from 500,000 to 800,000 human beings in 1994, and then later, 96, maybe another 500,000 in the Congo. Rwanda was the most densely populated country in Africa in '93, although actually it ranks on a land basis 6th rather than 1st, if you actually get into the data, as Peter Uven does. But it had a very, very thick population, very, very densely settled territory. Farm size was declining steadily from 49 right up until the 90s when the genocide began in '94. And many of the farms were on hillsides which were difficult to sustain and needed constant attention. And even before 1950, the country had suffered 17 famines. And famine is a real sign of trouble. Change that. Tutsi were about 14% of the population. They were concentrated in the southwest, where you see Butari and Gikunguro, but they were also present in central Rwanda and in western Rwanda, and close to the Congo in some cases. Can we move on now? So, Peter Uven, in his book Aiding Violence, reminds us of some of the environmental factors that are of interest. First of all, the Belgians, on deciding that they wanted to maintain trade and economic relations with Rwanda, so they would give up Rwanda as a colony, started in 1959 to shift sides and to give their political support to the Hutu majority, which was roughly 85% of the population. Let's go back. Sometimes I just move this, you know. And so large Tutsi landholders, holders of large landholdings, were shoved into Uganda and elsewhere. Sometimes they were killed between 59 and 62 and again in 73. And Hutu immigrants from the south moved onto their land and held it by virtue of abandonment under pressure. When I was in Brussels in October 1990, the day was October 1st, that the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, invaded from Uganda using Ugandan army equipment, etc. It was as if the Ugandan army had come into Rwanda. And the Brussels Belgian papers picked it up very early, were right on top of all sorts of provocations that were coming from the government side. as the invasion proceeded that justified arresting Tutsi intellectuals and suspected supporters of the Rwanda Patriotic Front. Immediately, there were local conflicts over land, and rural crime rose. Food production had begun to collapse in 1984, and the world price of coffee went into a tailspin. The key point is that for youth, and particularly young males, the future appeared to be hopeless as a consequence of the economic crisis. And the invasion of October 90 only worsened that crisis. 40% of the government budget, which was already being corruptly appropriated by people in the government, was shifted to military expenditures. And this underclass that the Interamwe recruited from, these were the thugs who went around with their machetes and set up roadblocks, etc., was really a kind of alternative employment for young men with no hope. Many other factors played into the genocide in Rwanda, and I'll come back to that at the end, or maybe the question period. I wanted to give you the evidence for an ecological and economic and population disaster, so you could think about those. I don't think, though, that these were the key factors that triggered the genocide, and neither does Peter Hooven. In the case of Darfur, you have a transhumescent economic culture in which pastoralists with cattle would move them regularly following the rains. And as they moved farther south and east with the rains, they entered into a symbiotic relationship with the sedentary farmers, who were often in the media identified as Arabs, while the pastoralists were often identified as Africans. And this is a false dichotomy, actually. It doesn't work. And all the stories we heard about, I'm raping you because you're an African and all that, I mean, they were raping, but it was much more complicated than that. The symbiotic relationship had always included councils of elders on both sides, between pastoralists and sedentary people in Western Sudan. But years earlier, before the outbreak of the mass killing in Darfur and this campaign, deliberate and systematic campaign of rape, the government in Khartoum, the government of Sudan, had broken the councils of elders and replaced them with civil servants who were parachuted in from northern Sudan, knowing nothing about the problems of the West. Now, it's not well known, but Darfur actually was sending a lot of students to study at universities in Khartoum. But these were not the people who were sent back to staff the new councils that ran the provinces that include the different parts of Darfur. Wishing to create a much more complex situation, a more stressful situation for the government of Sudan in the north, the guerrilla movement in the south, led by the Sudan People's Liberation Army, actually trained, armed, and directed the first Darfur rebels. They sent them in a column up towards Darfur. Many of them were killed in ambushes laid by the government of Sudan, but eventually their movement did take hold. All of this was before the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in about 2005. And once that Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed, the SPLA abandoned the Darfur rebels. They had been used. They were a tool in the campaign of the SPLA in Juba and in the south to put pressure on the government in the north. And they served their purpose, and they were discarded, and they were screwed. Can we go on? Now, this is what satellite photographs show us today of what happened as a consequence of this manipulation of the situation. I mean, the people in Darfur had legitimate grievances. I've hinted at some of them already. But the fact is that the government of Sudan adopted a counterinsurgency strategy of pillaging and burning villages and destroying their inhabitants and driving them away from their villages so that they could spot the rebels. Today, it's a fact that in this area, as well as on the border between North and South Sudan, if somebody is observed from a helicopter or an aircraft of the government of Sudan coming out of a house, that house will be rocketed. All houses being destroyed. So on the left side, you can see some of the old village wall or compound walls. On the right side, you can see what look like smudges of ash, and that's what they are. That's what's happened to the villages today. George Clooney has put $1 million so we can get photographs like this from satellites. Today we have the UN mission in Sudan, but in fact, with Chinese leadership, the headquarters of the UN is located in the worst possible place to station troops, off the rail line, away from the major airfields, and away from artesian well water. And the Chinese are very proud of how they subverted the mission. So the difference between Nyala and El Fashir describes a lot about the difficulties this mission is having. Were it not for the Rwandan troops of UNAMID, things would be far worse. But the point is that the pressure here in Darfur was really based on an age-old set of conflicts and frictions that was settled easily between the elders in years gone by. What changed was two things. Apart from the destruction of the elders' councils, first of all, global warming caused the cattle migrations to cease synchronizing with the planting cycle of the farmers who were sedentary. And the cattle would arrive now when the crops were still in the fields. They had to because they were following the rains and things were too dry up north, and as they came down too early. And so they started to eat the crops in the fields. That's the first thing that happened. Now, it used to be that the farmers welcomed the cattle because their manure fertilized and renewed the soil. So when they came in and ate the stubble and deposited their manure, everything worked perfectly. Global warming changed that. The destruction of the councils of elders prevented any form of effective mediation or conciliation to improve the situation. I also thought we should look at the post-election violence in Kenya. This is a very clear case of resource pressure, but also history having an effect. There's an excellent report, which you'll see on bibliography. The struggle is cast as a struggle among different national groups, the Kikuyu, the Kalenjins, the Luos, and others. But it all goes back to the colonial land distribution program that the British left behind them, the Sydenham scheme it was called, in which the Kikuyu, who had supported many of whom had supported the anti-colonial Mau Mau uprising in the 50s, got more land from the former British settlers than many of the other peoples, like the Kalenjins and the Luo. And resentment against Kikuyu control of land was manipulated by politicians on both sides of the political races in 2007, 2008, with the result that hundreds and then thousands of people were killed in the most cruel ways. Let's go to the next slide. At least 8 factors, including environmental degradation and this historical grievance, came into play. And the bottom line was that it became unsafe for Kikuyu to live outside of Nairobi in other parts of the Rift Valley where the soil is the best. Let's go on. This is the bibliography. You can see some of the works that I'm referring to. And I think that I have time, thank goodness, 2 minutes and 14 seconds to go. I have time to tell you why I don't think that these environmental factors are the sine qua non of these mass atrocities. The simple answer is it takes incitement. It takes manipulation by political leaders to cause people to frame and interpret their suffering as soluble or solvable by killing their neighbors. That's not where they normally want to go. However, many of the Hutu killers believed, after October 1990's invasion by the RPF in Uganda, that if they won, they would lose their land. And they were told that by their government. They were told that there were and it was true, there were 500,000 refugees who are Tutsi, and they're coming back if the RPF wins, and they're going to take the land you've been living on since 1962 or 1973. So that's where the key variable arises that we have to watch out for, and that's why Marie and our interns and people like Adon, who've helped us as well, have been looking at early warning signs, particularly in the area of what we call dangerous speech, following the lead of Susan Benesch, who works out of Washington as a private researcher. And that's why the MIGS Media Monitoring Project is very important for people at the UN Office of the Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide and elsewhere. So I think I'll stop here so we have time for questions.
Wonderful. So Frank is an amazing resource. We really appreciate him taking the time to come speak with us. And we're up for discussion and questions. We'd like to start off.
I'll go back to this, but if you want my email address, it's there. Yes. Once you...
Yes, yes. Where was there a hand?
Marie will ask the first
don't
question.
Don't be shy.
Or Adon, I don't know. Or anybody else who has a question or comment.
Well Frank, I thought your presentation was wonderful with all the detail. Could you talk more about how did the scarcity of water in Darfur kick off the genocide? What, logistically, how were the forces competing over water?
Well, there is a competition over water, but I don't think that was the key issue.
Okay.
It was rather the friction between the keepers of the cattle and the farmers. Water is certainly an issue, but I guess your point is well taken. The cattle were where they were because they were following the rains, but that was nothing new. They always did that. That's how transhumescent culture works. You see it in many, many parts of the world. So the new thing was that they had to come south earlier because of climate change. And the crops were still in the field, which should not be true, because if you have climate change, everything should move up. But that didn't, the crops did not mature faster to help out. So nature played a trick on the cattle keepers. There is in fact, there was a false report which said that sitting below Darfur was this enormous reservoir of water, just more water than you could ever dream of. It turned out it was an empty space. It had been there, but just as in Australia, when I was in Australia out in the desert in '93, I saw all of these huge irrigation sprinklers that we also have in Iowa and other places, right? And you know, when you use those, you spray water into the air and it falls down, right? But 40% of it evaporates before it hits the ground, right? And I said to the people I was with from Australia, this is insane, what are you doing? You know, did you ever hear of drip agriculture? Something that would conserve the water. I said, we have so much water, we don't have to worry. Okay, so flash forward now to about 2010. Sydney is in danger of burning up. They don't have enough water. There's a drought. They can't, the water is almost gone. It's really almost gone. And it's sailing now because it's so concentrated. And that had already happened in Darfur ages ago. People come in, they try to grow cotton by pumping out the water, just the way they do in Arizona. And they shoot themselves in the foot. It's not sustainable agriculture.
Questions? Yes, Marie.
Well, I know it takes like incitement to actually cause mass atrocities and genocide, but where do you see the next conflict maybe linked to resources?
Thank you for that. I wanted to say a few words about Burma and the Rohingya, and I wanted to say a little bit more about the dangers in some other countries right now. We're particularly concerned at the moment about what's actually going on behind the scenes within the military in Burma. And now we're getting daily reports translated for us from Burmese of incitement in Burma, or Myanmar, by extremists among Buddhist monks who are carrying the can for what's happening. Over 1,000 and more Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine State on the border between Myanmar and Bangladesh have been killed, largely in pogrom-like rioting, triggered by seemingly trivial events, like a woman who was out shopping and says she was insulted by a Muslim or something like that. What's really telling is the police and the army stand by and let the killing take place. So we think what's happening behind the scenes is that there's a split in the army of Myanmar. One faction has decided its bread is buttered in deeper economic connections with the West and inviting Western oil companies to exploit Burma's oil, which has been known to exist for many, many decades now. And it's abandoned the economic alliance with the People's Republic of China, which is building dams and would like to exploit these resources, but is not paying people off the way the Western companies could pay them off. And so this dominant faction in the military has switched sides. They've liberated the imprisoned, many of the imprisoned leaders of the movement for greater democracy and freedom in Burma, including Nobel Prize winners, etc. And the other faction, which has been left behind and is stuck with the alliance with the Chinese, is jealous of this and is trying to create, this is a hypothesis, we think this is what's happening, is trying to create an emergency situation that would justify a military coup against the dominant faction. And so that's how we currently make sense of the data that's coming in. And the 969 movement, which is the extremist Buddhist movement, seems to actually be sponsored by some of these dissident army officers.
Okay. Yes, Dan.
First of all, thank you very much for
You're welcome.
my speech. Could you comment on your views on how climate change could influence conventional views on sovereignty, particularly so on issues pertaining to land depletion, and how that in turn could affect governments' views on intervention in conflict situations?
Why don't you elaborate a little more on it, Don?
Sure.
How do you think that climate change could influence notions of sovereignty?
There's a very strong debate going on in the literature between climate change and conflict that argues that in the foreseeable future, land depletion is going to have a very strong say in the decision-making process of governments when it comes to intervening in a specific conflict in that specific territory. Now, there's examples such as island nations, for example, that obviously will be even more affected.
Especially if they disappear. Yeah,
Exactly.
they become Atlantis. Yeah.
Precisely. So I wanted to see if you could comment a bit more on that specific link.
Okay, well, if you're talking about the islands in the South China Sea, off Vietnam, etc., then clearly there are implications there. And countries like Bangladesh, which will lose a lot of their land and are already only about 1 inch above sea level, and on top of that have arsenic in their artesian water. So you have your choice. You can either stay there and be poisoned slowly by the arsenic in the water, or go right to the coast and be drowned. Bangladesh is an ecological disaster in many ways. So it's pioneered credit for farmers and all the rest, and particularly for market women and others. But it's in deep trouble as climate change advances. But overall, I think climate change poses far greater risks in other areas. I agree with you, it will also complicate the question of who owns what, and also the drive to annex new territories. But I think the real problem is resource-driven. Countries like China that are now developing car ownership as fast as any country in the history of the automobile are looking for more petroleum and are looking for more energy for their factories and so on.
So in the Chinese case, linking this back to Burma,
Yes.
and if we look at the Southeast Asian region and the Mekong River,
Yes.
although there is a Mekong Commission that's supposed to help these people all get along.
The Tennessee Valley Authority.
Exactly,
transferred
yeah.
to China. Yes.
Yeah, and it was in fact originated really with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that started
That's
the whole
right.
thing.
And they modeled it on the TVA.
Yeah, and it had to do with building dams and so on.
Right.
China goes, well, no, it doesn't join the commission, has the upper hand because it controls the outflow of the river from Yunnan province.
Right.
Builds dams up there, basically tells everyone else, look, we can shut this thing down if we want.
Yeah, it's like Ethiopia on their part of the Nile in
Yeah.
respect to Egypt.
Okay. So these are, I think, I'm fascinated by your detailed discussion of Burma though, because
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of exactly what's going on there, and I hope I can hear more about that in the near future. But I do think, yeah, there is this larger regional geopolitical / resource context, right? And
Yeah.
I think this is what's driving these things. in many
One
ways.
of the motivations underlying the insanity of the Khmer, not as insanity, but the perverse rationality of the Khmer Rouge, was that the Vietnamese had taken on the old Army Corps of Engineers program for themselves. And the Cambodians in the Khmer Rouge were aware of this, and they saw Vietnamese imperialism reaching into the rivers that used to flow to Angkor Wat, et cetera, in the lakes, drying them out and destroying the basis of a hydraulic civilization, and Cambodia, or Kampuchea as they called it, falling under Vietnamese sovereignty. And so that, it's often not mentioned, but the Khmer Rouge were very aware of this. And when they started to accuse some of their own soldiers of being agents of the hated Vietnamese, and they really did hate the Vietnamese, they treated them as the first enemy, the top enemy. And that was one of the major reasons. Anyone else?
My personal,
Yeah.
and
Go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you become a constructivist, right?
It's good to find out what I am. Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
Aren't you wondering?
But that's why I love working with Peter, because he brings so much to the table.
Well,
It helps
we
me.
can get this discussion off and on for
Okay.
years, I should add, but,
Yeah.
but yeah, framing the resentment more or less.
Yeah.
You know? And I think climate change is, what it's doing is it's altering the context. It's the deleterious impacts of climate change are making
Right.
perhaps easier to engage in that type of incitement, and it becomes deeper ingrained in the collective psyche that, we are somehow, right? Whether it's legitimate or not, we are oppressed, and when we need to rebel. And so it changes the atmospherics. I mean that word in two ways, right?
Uvin calls this soft Malthusianism. And basically, it's exactly as you framed it. Climate change makes societies more fragile, more vulnerable, but it still takes the inciters who come along and take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you think?
Megan.
Do you think further research into sustainable agriculture in order to alleviate some of these conflicts, such as coming up with a new way of planting or a new crop to plant that would coincide with the new migration?
Yes.
Do you think that would alleviate some of these population
It's what they call
conflicts?
intensification, right? And it's what people do to solve these problems. So that had happened in Rwanda decades earlier. As these crises of the 80s developed that we were talking about, the farmers began to intercrop more and crop more intensively. They also took over cattle land that they converted to agricultural land where they could, where the elevation permitted it. Often it didn't. You don't have malaria in Rwanda normally, and you don't have a lot of the diseases because of the higher altitude. And it's true in many parts of the Rift Valley as well. It's like being in California, basically, only higher up in the mountains. So yes, intensification can help, but it only goes so far. The problem is, all right, so here's the deal. The government of Rwanda is trying to modernize agriculture, the current government, right, the RPF government. So I was in Rwanda. I have this little shtick that I engage in. I did it in Egypt. I've done it in other countries. So you go out in the country with somebody who speaks Arabic or Kinyarwanda, and you just drive. And then you stop the car. You see a farmer. In Egypt, I saw a guy with his bullock the water wheel. And I said, okay, he's on a lunch break, let's go. So I have some cans of Coca-Cola with me. And we go out and say, would you like, we talk to you for a few minutes. So I start talking to him about the dam. And I ask, so how is that affecting you? And what do you think about how the government is shaping your land use in your area? Are you getting fertilizer? What's happening? And people will tell me. They're very happy to speak. Farmers like to talk to people if they're on their lunch breaks. In Rwanda, I did this, and I spoke to maybe a dozen farmers. And it was horrific. I saw a guy, I know cassava because I lived in Nigeria for a year, and I used to go out with entomologists and agronomists at 5 and 6 in the morning, catching grasshoppers and labeling them to see, because they were eating up the cassava leaves, and to figure out what the pattern was. They taught me a lot. So in Rwanda, I talked to this guy because he's dug up an entire field of cassava, which you don't do unless you're harvesting it to sell in the market. And I could see a lot of them were immature. He wasn't going to get a good price. So I said, why are you doing this? He said, the government is forcing me to do it. I have to plant hybrid cassava. He said, it's worse than that. I have some cows, and they're forcing me to butcher the cows because they want me to buy the new hybrid cows. And he said, this is terrible. The new variety of cassava uses too much water, and I don't have it. And the cattle, they're so fragile that I know they're going to die because I've seen it with my neighbors. But I have to do it because it's an order from the government. So the government in Rwanda is trying to reshape agriculture based on a North American model. It's hardly sustainable. No, it's not. But they're hybridizing. So their idea totally misses the fact that peasant agriculture is based on generations of wisdom. However, peasants can be educated too. They don't know everything. So you have to have this dialogue that never ceases between state planners and people on the ground, and they're just not interested. There was an agricultural research station just down the road from this guy. So I said, well, you're getting some help from these scientists down the road. He said, those guys, they never come out. They have their experimental plot, and we have to go to them. They don't come to us. So it's hardly the Iowa model. It's strictly top-down. And this is what urban people do to people who live on the land. Urban people think they know it all. They've traveled the world. They come back with their great wisdom, and they do a cookie cutter on the people, and the people suffer.
Well, I hate to end on that note, but it is part of the reality. We're going to, let's give Frank a big hand.
I'm going to be speaking about research and sustainable food production in Iceland. I went there as an internship through an associate of my professor, Dr. James Grant. I went to Dr. Stefan Ole Steinkrimsen at Loyola University College, and I worked under Nicholas Laranga and Amy Fingerly. Okay, for those of you who don't know where Iceland is, it's located in the Atlantic Ocean between Greenland and Europe. As you can see, it's an island country. It's very isolated, and it's hard to get shipments into it. And so it's really developed a culture and an agriculture surrounded by its natural resources to exploit what it already has and doesn't import anything. It's about the size of Newfoundland, and it has 320,000 people. I was working up in the north near Sauerkraker in Holar. Their main source of land farming is dairy farming, and their three main meat sources are cow, sheep, and horse, mainly because the country is located very north near the Arctic Circle, and it has 8 months of darkness and 3 months of light. So the farming season is very short, so what they grow is hay, and so they can raise the animals. They're also chosen because they have no maintenance. They take care of themselves during the winter months by growing this long, thick fur. But I'll be speaking about the aquaculture. You can see that the country is riddled with these small lakes and streams, which are conducive to salmonids, which are fish that go from streams to ocean for spawning. This is what the Arctic char, which was what my research was on. They're smaller than salmon, as you can see. They're also more economically stable for aquaculture because they grow faster. They're slightly smaller, that's why, but you can grow many more of them because they do very well in close environment with a larger density. And I was working with the resident form on the left there. I was working through Loyola University College. It's a educational research institute specializing in aquaculture, rural tourism, and equine studies. And especially the government is interested in Arctic char. So the research was headed by Dr. Stefan Ole Steinkamsen up in the center photo. It's basically funded in order to understand the conditions in which streams in Iceland are stocked. River stocking with char, with bass, and with salmon was a traditional form of aquaculture before they actually had the basins for aquaculture. And they would take small juveniles and place them in certain streams where they would grow into maturity, go out to sea, and come back to spawn where they would be collected by fishermen. It got out of popularity when the new movement came in to be aquaculture in the ocean nets and in big bats. But it's coming back into popularity, especially in Nordic countries that are riddled with these streams, because it allows farmers to do their own farming, and it takes advantage of the natural resources in the country itself. So what we did to collect our sample population was first we did electrofishing, which is when you walk around with a battery on your back with a cathode in front of you and an anode behind you. You electrify the fish is attracted to the cathode in front of you, you pick it up with a net. It's completely non-invasive. It only stuns the fish for maybe a few seconds, and it has no lasting effects whatsoever. And we put them in a bucket, and then we looked at the size of the fish. And depending on the stream, its temperature, time of the year, there'll be different sizes for a 1+ fish, which is between 1 and 2 years of age. And then we would select our sample population and take sample measurements to see its growth. We would take its initial weight and initial body length and see how our treatments would affect its growth rate. Then we tag the individuals with polymer tags, which is like a liquid plastic tag that you would insert into the dorsal fin. You can see in the next slide, right there. The polymer tag is completely biodegradable. It doesn't affect the environment or the fish whatsoever, and its lifetime is about a few weeks. You put 2 different colors or 2 of the same color to identify each individual so that we could do individual behavioral measurements to see how they would actually feel, I guess, in the enclosures over the 2 or 3 week period that we were watching them. We then did direct observations in the enclosures. These are the enclosures that we placed, and you can see that this is the streams that we were using. They're not very big, but the whole landscape is riddled with them. And so if you could have fish running through these and spawning here, and farmers could go on their land and pick out dinner, that would be a very economic way of providing food to a relatively small country population. And we observed them in these enclosures. First, we set up the enclosures by homogenizing the substrate, which just means to make the bottom of the enclosure look like its natural environment. And for the treatment where we manipulated the number of hiding places, meaning the number of rocks where they could seek shelter during the times when they weren't foraging, this is what we did right here. Then we took direct measurements in a grid pattern to give a 3D image of what they're actually living in. So where is the water fastest, where is it slowest, and why would they be hanging out in certain areas more than others, or defend a territory more than others. Then we did direct observation to see if there was aggression, territoriality, where they would be foraging where they would be resting, who is foraging more, and who grew more. This is an example of one of the observations that we would make. It's where they would be foraging in the column. Arctic char forage on these drifting invertebrates. This is a chironomid. It's the larvae of a midgefly. And depending on where it is in the column, you can tell what kind of other foods they'll be eating. So if chironomids live on the substrate down here, they forage right here. And so if their food source is not active at that time of day, they will forage down here. If they are active during the day, they're trying to migrate to a new place where they can forage. So they'll be drifting in the water with the water current. And the fish will be eating right in the middle of the column. And if there's absolutely no activity and there's very little food availability, they will be eating whatever falls from the air or gets trapped in the water column at the top. Then we did 24-hour observations. So there it's day all the time, and so the fish are always active. And it's very interesting to see in Nordic countries where these fish are found, because during the night, during the 8 months that it's dark, they're also foraging over this 24-hour cycle. So unlike here, where we would assume that fish are eating in the day when their food is most active and then not feeding at night, or vice versa, there that's completely eliminated. So you can actually look at why a fish is actually eating at certain times of the day. And the preliminary findings suggest that the fish actually don't look at what time of day it is, because they can't tell because it's always daylight. They're actually really dependent upon their food source, which is active at certain times of the day. And they have like an internal clock. So it's really dependent. When you're looking at a stream to choose to do stocking, especially with Arctic char, you have to pick one depending on its drift sample, so its actual food source. You have to look at when they're active and how much what the density is of their food source. It really depends on that. So if you go to, let's say, northern Canada, where you can find Arctic char, but it's not really exploited as a resource, you can look at different streams and take a drift sample, which is just putting a net in the water and collecting what comes through it over a time period, and see what kind of food is available in that stream, at what times of the day, and at what density. And you can calculate how many fish you can rear in that stream and have a viable population to be harvested by a local farmer. It's a new way of providing food in a small town or in a rural community. And the research is ongoing. It's continuing with Nicholas Laranga this year and next year with his PhD. And it's a part of a longer ongoing process with Dr. Stefanoli Steinkamson and with the Icelandic government. And I'd like to give a special thanks to my professor, James Grant, Dr. Stefanoli, and Nicholas and Amy, who had me and treated me very, very well as their research assistant, and also to Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability for allowing me to do my internship in sustainability with them and be able to share it with you guys, which is a privilege. So, yeah.
We're going to take questions for Megan while we're setting up for the next presentation.
Yeah.
So what questions do we have? It's fascinating to learn about Iceland. Yes,
I found that really interesting about the extended daylight, and I had never thought about that before, and how fish or any types of animals. Did you see any kind of change outside of fish as far as how other types of animals might act with extended daylight or extended night? I just hadn't thought
Yeah,
about
so
that.
if you look at literature that's up in the Arctic Circle or in northern Canada, northern Russia, you can look at northern Europe, and Iceland, of course, they're bird crazy over there. And there's lots of literature, and it shows just that that they're adapted to their prey. They're adapted to behavior
So about the
rather
fishes.
than daylight cues.
Right.
Yeah, they work with an internal clock, and they really adapt to their surroundings in relation to their prey and predators.
Okay, Matthew, if you can look at that.
I was interested in what you said about the development of agriculture. What are some of the reasons, I'd like to know, what were some of the reasons that the Icelandic government is looking for moving into that area more?
Right, so it's always been a very big part of Icelandic culture. The country, for such a small population, is riddled with museums saying about the drying cod and the fishing industry around the coast is the major part of the country's history and economic wealth, and it has lots and lots of ties with different governments and different shipping routes. And it's just in recent years that they've really kind of looked at the interior of the country, where they have cattle rearing and horse rearing, where they looked at the farmers, and the farmers did this, and it was no big deal. It was understood that you take a fish, you put it in the streams, and when you want fish, you go to your stream, you pick out you go fishing, and you have it there. And to them, it was just this part of life, in a way, to exploit the natural resources and it was already there, and really keeping to their roots of what the country has to offer, and not what they want. Not what they want to copy from another country. It's really what's available in their country, and how they can exploit it for their own thing. And they started aquaculture when they had more Western influence with the big aquaculture vats. And they did a lot of research in there because there was a big demand for Arctic char and for salmon, and they have the resources to produce it. But now they're going back to stream stocking. And in places where, salmonids are endangered, especially in Norway. They have a lot of work going on there with Arctic char, trying to reestablish the population. The research is really useful for them to set up an area and choose rivers to protect and say, this is where we're going to start our population. They're going to thrive here because of these conditions. This is the research that tells you what those conditions are.
I just had a question. You mentioned behavioral changes when you did the tagging, or you were just
behavioral observations.
Yeah. What exactly were those observations, or what were you looking
right.
for?
So when you think of fish, you don't really think of behavior, right? But they become a model organism for behavioral ecology, just because they are very defensive, territorial. They do there's new research going into personality and how that influences things. But this one was a fairly simple experiment for behavior. So territoriality just means a larger fish usually would be chasing another fish out of a certain area. And there's a quadrat on the bottom, a grid system. And you can, every 10 seconds, you'll record where every fish in that enclosure is located. And you can say, this one chased this one, and then they went back to their original point. And over days, you'll see that they always forage at that point. And when you do your actual measurements in the enclosure, let's say you find that your current velocity is much greater in that corner, therefore they get more drifting invertebrates coming there. It's a better foraging spot, a better place to feed. They grow faster. So their behavior is directly influenced to what spots are going to make them grow better. And also they're territorial about the rocks that would be in the enclosure that would give them a break from the constant current, where they can rest on the bottom without expending any energy.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. Thank you so much, Megan.
You're welcome.
We're going to get started next with David Holden, Dr. David Holden. We're very happy to have David here. He is a Fulbright scholar visiting from the University of Prince Edward Island, and he's actually a second-time Fulbright scholar. He was previously a Fulbright scholar working in British Columbia, and he was the associate editor of Food Security and Hunger for a Journal on Hunger and Environmental Nutrition. He has also secured 2 Fulbright Canada Eco Leadership Grants to conduct food security and ecological nutrition-related work in his community. He has a number of publications, including Research Gaps from a Disciplinary Perspective, a Nutritionist Perspective, in Hunger and Obesity Understanding a Food Insecurity Paradigm. Also, the Community Nutrition in Action, an entrepreneurial approach. He has an article called The Position of the American Dietetic Association on Food Insecurity in the United States. And he's been a registered dietitian nutritionist on RDN for over 25 years. We're very happy to have David with us.
All right, thank you so much. First, thanks to Fulbright Canada for providing my funding to be here today, and for Carol for encouraging me to submit a proposal. So I thought we would bring it a little bit closer to home and see what's happening here in Canada regarding food insecurity, because believe it or not, in a country like Canada where we have agricultural abundance, some people do not have access to food. And so this is my community in Ohio, where I'm from, where I live. I live in the Appalachian region of Ohio, and I was born and raised in the Appalachian region, and actually grew up in an impoverished home where lacking access to food was a reality, and I think it probably has influenced my decision to change from being a basic scientist to doing more applied work. And I am at UPEI currently. Okay, so this is reality for me. I'm a beekeeper. I have chickens in my front yard, and I teach my students to garden, because I think it's important that if I talk about food access, that I participate in my own food production. And I want the people who I train to work in nutrition to know what Brussels sprouts actually look like. And so these are some of my students, and this is my son and I with our beehive, and that is our favorite chicken, Squawky. And so I live on the West Virginia border of the United States here in Ohio, the poorest county in Ohio, and I was born and raised about right here in Pennsylvania, and so in coal mining country. And so I'm living and working in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. All right, what are we going to talk about today very briefly? A sustainable food system, how I see it, and others, then food security, and what is happening in Canada. And so Tagto and Harmon said that the health of eaters reflects the health of the food system. Healthy individuals, healthy families, healthy farms, healthy communities, and healthy ecosystems are a result of a vibrant, resilient, and sustainable food system. And I do agree with them on this. And so they thought that we need to develop resiliency within the food system so that we can protect human and environmental health. And so this is a perspective with which I'll provide a few comments today. So this is one model of a sustainable food system, and that a sustainable food system is built on the foundation of human, natural, and economic capital. And so any inputs from here for the food that we produce should be ecologically sound, socially acceptable, and an economically viable choice. And so that includes, making sure that the farmers have a livable wage, and so on and so forth. And so where food security focuses on is really the top of this pyramid, where we produce food and then people consume it, and then we have different outcomes, including those related to health. Are these slides available to people or no?
We can certainly make them
Yeah.
available. They don't have them now.
So now food security, there are three concepts. So I think these are some take-home messages: food availability, food access, and food utilization. And so our first speaker talked about how when things change, maybe food isn't even available for people to purchase. And the food access piece, do people have resources to buy food? And then can they utilize it? Can they prepare it? And is their body healthy enough to handle it? Now this is from a produce auction in my community. The Amish use this as an outlet for them to sell the produce that they produce to restaurants and larger segments of the market. So no matter where we go on the planet, if people have access to food, they probably think that they're healthier and they feel better about their life and their household. And the definition that we use in North America for food security is all people at all times having access to enough food for an active, healthy life. I'm glad this is included today because I think it is one of the most basic human rights, and the sustainability conversation often centers on food production. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about it today. And so, is food available? Is it nutritionally adequate? Is it safe to eat? And can people get it in socially acceptable ways? So how do we recognize food insecurity here in Canada? Well, people don't have access to food. They depend on community assistance programs. They skip meals. They eat Kraft dinner instead. I'm not saying Kraft dinner is bad, but they eat Kraft dinner instead of eating more nutritionally sound foods. And then they seek assistance from food banks. If someone is standing in a food line, there's probably a couple that don't really need the food. They're just there to save money or some reason. But if they're standing in line, they probably need it. So this is the state of Canada. And what is very interesting, and I'm not criticizing the Canadian government, but believe it or not, Health Canada does not assess their own food security data anymore. They are dependent upon private researchers securing funding and then publishing those results. So that is a new trend that has started to happen. And so about 12.3% of households in Canada were food insecure in 2011. And these are the most recent data just published at the end of the summer by a research group in Toronto, Valerie Tarasuk. And so that equates to about 1.6 million Canadian households. So if you are a visual person, this is the piece of the pie. Now, what this means, marginal food insecurity, this is where people are worrying that they have enough food. They're maybe buying low-cost foods. But then as we get worse, what is happening? People are skipping meals, and then at the very worst scenario, they're losing weight, or kids aren't eating for a whole weekend, for example. So in other words, the outcomes are a little more serious, or the behaviors. So what do people do who are food insecure? Well, they do the things that I mentioned before. Now here is the picture by province and territory. So Nunavut is the worst, and of course Newfoundland is the best. And so what we're seeing probably, I think, is because of the great economic conditions in Labrador, Newfoundland that's happening now. But who are the worst of the provinces? Believe it or not, the maritime provinces rank right up there. And in fact, 1 in 4 children on Prince Edward Island does lack access to food, and it is the worst in the country with the exception of Nunavut. And so this is very shocking. Some government officials in Prince Edward Island just came out with a statement last week acknowledging that they have a problem with food access. So these are available from that research group called Proof out of Toronto. And then if you do want the slides, I can send them to you. But this just gives the state of affairs by province. Okay, so who is at risk? And so The Hunger Games comes out, tomorrow, the second movie. So let's tie it to relevant popular culture. But here we have 2 kids, and this little boy is saying, I've been playing those basically Hunger Games ever since my mom and dad lost their jobs. And what this is saying is something happens in the home to cause some change in resource flow, and then people start lacking access to food. I know in our home, 1972, my dad fell down icy steps. He was the milkman. It's the only joke my 88-year-old mother tells to this day. Never heard her tell a joke, except her kids belong to the milkman, because we in fact do. For those of you who are less than 30, the milkman used to deliver milk to the door every day, and so he was blamed for a lot of kids that did not look like the family. So, was that an okay thing to say? And yes, okay. So, who has problems? Well, lone parent households have some of the biggest problems. Now, believe it or not, male lone parent households don't have as big a problem as female lone parent households. And I would assert that it's probably because of earning potential of males compared to females. And then there is no poverty measure in Canada, but households with lower incomes do have worse food insecurity, which is not surprising. Okay, much of the same. And then this just shows trends, and I just think this is very interesting. People say, what, Prince Edward Island? They grow a lot of potatoes. But as you can see, from 2005, they've gone from 13%, when it was a lot lower than that in the country. I believe it was about 8, up to 15.4. But then we see Newfoundland and Labrador, 15.7, and then they have slowly decreased. And we know their economic conditions have really improved there. So I think it just shows the importance of earning potential. And I would just want you to, as you're here this week, how can I contribute to a more sustainable food system to improve food security? And let me point you to this video. We're not hooked to the internet, so I won't show it. But this was funded by Fulbright Canada, and they have programs where you can secure funding to grow a project in your own community. And what we did, my students and myself and community members, we planted fruit trees on public land in our community, and then we developed a fruit map, both paper and electronic, telling the community when those fruit trees mature, and then anybody can come by, pick the fruit when the fruit is ready. And so it's a way to use public land to provide food to people that don't have access to it. There's a lot of red tape to cut through, because in our city you have to get every tree approved by the Tree Commission, but I think it's worth it. So I would encourage you to look at that YouTube video. And my hair's a lot longer. I wasn't in the Army Standard at that point, but and so I'm in the U.S. Army too. So that's not something I'm supposed to say in a foreign country, but I am. And the consulate's here, so I feel protected. Okay, so
I got your back.
this is a community garden in Prince Edward Island that just was started this year, grassroots effort to grow. And this is public land where they do have the community garden. So that's just a very brief, what's the state in Canada. But the truth is, millions of people in Canada can't make ends meet and don't have access to food. So, thank you.
We're going to take a couple questions for David while we're switching out the videos for the next speaker.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, David. Thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting. I was just wondering if you'd heard about the story in Halifax. There was a group of kids who came from an underprivileged community, and the government gave them a plot of land that was previously unused. It was garbage. They cleaned it up basically and turned it into a community garden. They started selling vinaigrettes and salad dressings at the local farmers market, and they made a lot of money. And they pitched the idea to Dragon's Den, which is a group of private investors, angel investors, and they ended up receiving $30,000 of funding to continue their project and to help also implement that within other regions in Canada. So it's a really inspiring story. I don't know if you saw it.
I did not see that. We do, in our community in Ohio, there is a group of kids that have done something similar. They haven't started making value-added products, but in our community we have an incubator kitchen, and it was government funded initially, and so it allows people to rent a commercial kitchen at a very small cost so they can develop value-added products. And a philosophy of many communities is to take farmers to be more self-sufficient, to have them develop value-added products. Thank you for that. I think it's a great example.
It's really inspiring.
Great. Peter, and then your name.
So thanks, David. It's nice to meet you. You mentioned that the privatization of data collection on health statistics.
Well,
Did I get that right?
okay, the data collection is being done by the government, but they are not analyzing the data.
Okay.
And so, for instance, the Toronto Research Group, now hopefully I have this translated correctly, so we'll just blame the American guy, that this research group they have to find their own funding. So I believe they got theirs from CHIR, so the Canadian Health Institute. But Health Canada used to analyze those data and then publish them as part of their health statistics. So I think that's kind of a step, now this is just my opinion, but I think that's a step backwards, because we're taking, it's not uncommon, but I think that the basic numbers of food insecurity should be published. And then if there are other relationships to those, maybe those should be other
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it casts another set of eyes on it, but not necessarily the broad set of eyes that we need.
Mhm.
So, interesting point, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question and then move on to the next speaker. Go ahead.
I guess this ties into data also. Do we know how food insecurity breaks down along racial lines potentially, or also immigrants? Because there's like an overlap in that in Canada. Is it?
Sure. I don't have those numbers. The proof people would. So if you look up Food Insecurity Canada, and it will come probably as one of the first things. The individuals that are excluded would be First Nation groups, are not included unless, well, on reservation. So that is one group that is not included in these data. And of course then people who are incarcerated or in an institution, not included in these as well. But those data are available. And usually there is some disparity, and it usually follows income earning potential because of probably lack of education and so on. So
you say that's the causal link, is the income potential of that?
well, again, causal link, I'm not sure, but the relationship, if you have less resources to buy food, then you, yeah. So.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much, David. We're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Jonathan Rodriguez. Thank you for coming, Jonathan.
All right, so I'll be speaking a little bit about what we do at Moisson Montréal, or if I would say it in English, Harvest Montreal. We used to call it like that in the earlier days. I'll be talking about what we do, explaining a little bit of what our mission is, and then I'll move slowly into food waste and explaining how it works and how the chain works, where the food waste is, and how we can act on in those different areas. So Moisson Montréal, established in 1984. We're the largest food bank in the country. We're a leader in food waste recuperation and food redistribution. Every dollar received at Moisson Montréal is $17 worth of redistributed food stuff. So what we do is, I like to call it food recycling, basically, and we'll speak about that. Our mission, ensure an optimal food supply to the community organizations that provide assistance to people in crisis on the island of Montreal. So we do not give out food directly to the population. We work with community organizations such as People's Potatoes here at Concordia. So they come to Moisson to get their food stuff. Foster the development of sustainable solutions to ensure food security. Good Food Box program is part of this area. So we have 3 focal points: economy, environment, and I'd like to call it promote the development of skills among it's volunteers. Basically, we have a lot of volunteers at Moisson Montréal. We're here to enable better access to healthy food. And we're working a lot now in the past years on preventing the waste of the healthy food. So this is the angle we're taking now and we're working on. We have 45 employees, close to 6,000 volunteers that came to Moisson Montréal, which is equivalent for us 39 full-time employees. Without those volunteers, we can't do what we have to do. So we're counting on them a lot, and yeah. 2 purchasing programs. We are aware that we cannot fulfill the needs of all the organizations. Why? Because we recycle. We give what we receive. So we put together. Well, we have 2 collective purchasing programs. One that's in partnership with Commerce Solidaire. The other one is the Good Food Box program to help out the organizations with what we cannot give them. I just wanted to point out our installations. It's 107,000 square feet facility. That's before now. We've invested. We've been investing a lot in the facilities to bring it up to level. It's quite impressive, actually. These efforts are giving results. We're well, you can maybe concentrate on this end here. So. 2013, we're at around 13 million kilos that were redistributed. It's worth around $72 million of foodstuff that were going to waste that were recuperated and redistributed in the community. And that's the difference with the reception. So the difference is basically what's not good. So out of the 14 million that came in, we basically had to throw out maybe 2 million kilos, which is not that much with on the total. So our network, 280 community organizations. We have 210 accredited members. Those are the community organizations that come on a regular basis. They're at Moisson every week. We have 70 other organizations that come when they have a specific need. The services, there's many services. I was asked to speak a little bit about what those services are. There's emergency supply of groceries, because people have a tendency to, when they think food bank, they only think about giving out a bag to a family or a food basket. The organizations in Montreal that work in food security and that come to Moisson Montréal is way broader than that. So there is emergency supply of groceries, but we also have a lot of meal services, snacks, collective kitchens. That's something. We have a lot of collective kitchens that come to Moisson. Workshops, soup kitchens, shelters, homeless shelters. All the homeless shelters come to Moisson. There's women's shelters, men's shelters. There's just low-cost groceries. We now have organizations that offer low-cost groceries. Meals on Wheels. Those are other type of services that are given. So over 200 community organizations, 140,000 people a month. Talking about children, that's in Montreal. It's 40,000 children. Out of the 140,000. Single to parent families, we're talking about that also, 56.8 in Montreal. We're almost doubled since 2008 for the elderly people. Employment income 11%. That's gone up also, and now we have more and more families that do have income that come that come for food aid, which is something that's been going up in the past years. Children 28%. All right. How much is wasted? How much of the food is wasted in this food supply chain? We're talking about between 30 and 40% of food. Globally, we're more talking about 1/3, 40%. I know in the U.S. it's closer to the 40%, which is one of the highest levels. But where does this happen? I have different steps. Step 1, harvest. We have sources of food waste, quality control criteria, customer orders, machinery. There's depending on the country, there's a lot of criteria. So the food doesn't go to the same countries depending on what the customers want. Machinery, I put it down because we have we've seen this a lot here in Quebec, where the farmers, they grow the crops, but they don't own the machinery, so it's the manufacturer that owns it. If they don't get if the clients don't do a purchase order, or finally they change their mind, don't need the product anymore, the food just stays in the field. So that's a problem, and then they come to us and they say, would you like to come have it? Now the possible solutions are there. Why am I talking about, let's look at the second one, creating teams of volunteers to harvest in the fields. We've been trying to do this. This is something hard. It's a lot of logistics to have teams going out and just trying to get all the produce out of the fields. So we're moving towards a partnership between food banks, farmers, and food manufacturer companies. That's something we're trying to work on, to try to get all these items out, which are very good items, but were just left there since no one was ready to go harvest them. And a food processing plant, I'll talk about that a bit later. The second step where we have waste is the processing and distribution of food. So we have production and procurement estimates. That's basically with the manufacturers. Insufficient customer orders, losses during production. There is losses during production. Quality control, the market standards are there. If there's one little ingredient that's different, then the whole batch goes to waste. So instead of throwing that out, we're trying to work in partnership with the industry to recuperate all these goods. And the food processing plant is something we're putting together at Moisson Montréal right now. In 2014, we'll have food processing plant in our facility, which will enable us to. There's different steps that are there, but basically the idea is to go recuperate all these food items and have them cut out into smaller pieces than frozen, and we can give them back to the organizations when we have less fruits and vegetables that come in. A lot of our fruits and vegetables, we're around maybe 45% of what we have at Montreal that is fruit and vegetables. We get them a lot at Marché Central here in Montreal, where you have all these redistribution of food, and what they have is they have the food come in, and if the customers don't go get them, then it just stays there week after week, and when it's down to a level where they would throw it out, then they call us and we go get them, and then we have the triage, the trimming, and so we just want to get this to be done with machinery so we can have more done. Supermarkets, which is the last step where we work, sources of food waste. It's basically customer expectations, so we have high expectations on the appearance, the freshness, the quality of the product, sometimes on the estimates. And you know, if you go to the supermarket and we want to have the alleys full of stuff, and we want to look, it has to look good, you know. But at the end of the day, all this produce that's not sold goes to waste. We're working on it's a new project, produce recovery project, with 3 large grocery store chains, Loblaw, Walmart, and Target. You might have heard about this in the news lately, but we're actually repackaging the meat instead of them throwing it out, and we're redistributing them in the accredited organizations. And we've started this 2 months ago, and we're already over a ton of meat that came in. So it's only starting. Then there's the consumer. So I'll end on this because my time's out. But this is around 40% of the food waste is happening at this stage. So we're working on the other 60%, but there's a 40% that's the consumer. So unused food, meals cooked in exceeding quantities, leftovers thrown in the garbage. It's just so there's consumer awareness and empowerment is something that will be helping, and planning of food consumption. So there's a 60% we're working on, but there's a 40% that we can't actually work on.
Okay.
We'll stop there.
All right, so we'll take questions. Melody's setting up for PowerPoint.
Just a quick question. Do you do any work with the Table des Chefs organization in Montreal? They also work with the redistribution of food, but I think it's more of a focus on restaurant waste.
The Table des Chefs works mainly with restaurant waste. They also work with the hotels, and so what they do is they put organizations in contact with these restaurants, and they go pick up the. But we don't. They are specific. Yeah, they're specific with meals that have already been prepared, as we're working more on the raw material that comes in. So it's 2 different areas. Yeah.
You were talking about your food workshops, basically, I guess, teaching parents and children how to cook their own meals, and you use raw ingredients. Do you think that would affect your 40% that just can't figure out how much to cook for themselves?
We don't do the workshops. It's the organizations that come to Montreal that do the workshops. But I've been working in community organizations before also that we're doing workshops, and yes, it does affect because everything starts with education. That's where it starts off, and you have some programs that are doing that in schools. You have organizations that do it in their own organizations, but a lot of the process is education. The Good Food Box program also does that, where sometimes we offer some, because the ground level is it's one thing to offer the fruits and the vegetables, but what we've noticed is that even if you offer them, the people sometimes don't use them because they don't know how to use them. They don't know what to do with it. They've never seen it. It's the first time they have this. They see peppers or whatever, and they don't know what to do with them. So the whole education process with the children, but also with the parents, I think is a key to for the future. Yeah.
Yes.
if we're talking about food insecurity, and I feel like the issue that is being touched by Muscle Mobile is access.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if actually either of you two have an idea of what systemic things need to change so that organizations like, hopefully it'd be wonderful if Muscle Mobile one day didn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? That people are just, by virtue of their jobs that they had where they live, you're able to access their own food. Do you guys have ideas on what kind of key things need to change in our system?
We could talk for hours about that, but
No, but yeah.
I think there's two angles. First, there's the consumer needs to change the way they want things to be. I mean, if a banana that's a little bit bigger, we don't want to see it and we don't want to buy it. I mean, that's part of the answer is there. So we've got to change the way we're seeing things and the way the marketing goes. And you know, I mean, there's something that we can do. On the other end, there's this whole food is very globalized also. I mean, we have imports, exports, so there's a whole system behind where the way it works and the criteria that are in the industry automatically lead to food waste. So I mean, but I believe, I don't know what you think, but I believe a lot starts with, it all starts at the end. So everything is based on the consumer's criteria. So if the consumer changes his way of seeing things, then the whole system or the whole steps behind will have a tendency to shift, and then we'll be wasting less. And the second thing I'd say is that we're seeing a lot more community organizations or a lot more different efforts in cities now. We were talking sustainability, and there's a lot of little looking for my word in English, but these initiatives, a lot of new initiatives going on in the city where you see this. In Europe, they're in front of us, and in many countries they've already doing this in cities like Montreal. But in Montreal, in the last 10 years, all these initiatives aren't seen the same way. It used to be very marginal. Now it's shifting, and I believe that's empowerment. So there's a lot of education that's behind that has been done here for many years, and we're starting to see a little bit of results on that. Yeah.
David, we'll
Yeah.
let you answer, and then we'll move on.
I'll be very brief. Food banks were created in the 80s as a temporary solution to hunger. And we know that now that's not the case. It's not temporary. So I think improving the economic self-sufficiency of households is probably the biggest thing that we can do. Of course, on PEI they say, well, that woman shouldn't be playing bingo. And why are they buying cigarettes? Of course, we do have to deal with problems of addiction, and we do have to worry about, the health of families and why they do what they do. But I think livable incomes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. That's great. Moving next to our last speaker on the food sustainability panel, coming at things from a different approach about pollinators and helping the food supply from the growth stage. This is Melanie McCaver. She is a PhD candidate who at Université de Québec de Montreal, UQAM, in the Department of Biology. She also teaches biodiversity, sustainable forest management, and reproductive plant ecology at Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability. She's part of the North American Pollinator Protector Campaign, and she advocates for legislation to help protect pollinators, bees, and other things, not just bees. I learned from her. Pollinators are more than bees.
That's right.
Right? And she is also working on developing protective measures to have sustainability criteria under the Convention for Biological Diversity, which some of you will learn more about when you go to the Secretariat on the Convention for Biological Diversity, which is one of the afternoon field trips. Melanie also worked as an intern in Washington, D.C. at the USDA Forest Service. And she also, she's been wonderful about supporting the conference and encouraging her students to all come. How many of you are Melanie's students? Are any of her students in here? Oh, there we are. Okay, great.
Very good.
Terrific. Thank you for joining us, Melanie.
I'm taking notes. Thank you very much, Carol, and thank you for organizing this symposium. So today I'm going to talk about the honeybee decline and what we can do about it in terms of solutions. So it's great that we heard a lot about food security and all the other components that go into basically how we need to protect pollinators in order to ensure our food supply. Thank you. So first of all, we want to look at plant diversity. So over 352,000 species of plants are angiosperms, i.e. flowering plants. And most of you are aware, I know my students are, that fruit comes from flowers. And 88% of those depend on pollinators. So they're fully dependent on animals to transfer the pollen in order to have fertilization, in order to have fruit. Thank you. And not only that, but these flowering plants provide many, many ecosystem services, so such as clean air and water, soil nutrient cycling, climate regulation, disease control, control of soil erosion, and of course pollination itself. And flowering plants are also responsible for much of biodiversity in the sense that pollinators are responsible for the fertilization of all of these flowering plants. These flowering plants then produce fruit that are then eaten by frugivores, i.e. animals or other taxa that eat fruit. And those organisms then transfer those fruits or the seeds of those fruits around, and therefore there's a feedback into plant diversity once again. So these frugivores, who are they? Birds, other reptiles, yes, birds are reptiles. Small mammals, large mammals like bears, and of course us. So now we'll look at our situation. So 75% of our main world crops depend on pollinators. So that's a lot of them. And although, as David pointed out, many of us here in North America and in certain parts of Scandinavia are mainly eating grasses, which are not pollinated by animals, many people around the world rely on animal pollinated food. And not only that, animal pollinated food, fruits, they're the nutritious ones. So those are the ones that are high in vitamins and minerals in nutrition. And so they're really, really important, far more important than the grass crops. Could you go back for 1 second? Thanks. And not only that, but economically, of course, pollination is responsible for over 153 billion around the world. Go ahead. So with all of that, we're obviously quite concerned that we're experiencing a decline in the honeybee. The honeybee being the main pollinator, and remember that there's not only bees, there are other pollinators, but we're looking here at the honeybee. So the honeybee has experienced a decline, and so we're going to look at why. Now, pollinators in the past have experienced declines, in particular bees, and we know that. But this particular decline is far greater than the ones that we know we've experienced in the past. I mean, indeed, you can go back and look, for example, in the Bible, and you'll see references to pollinator declines even there. Amos, for example, was a very famous fig piercer. And so we know that these declines are cyclic. However, this one is far greater than anything we've experienced in the past, we believe. So what are the causes of the declines? Well, there are several causes, and you've probably heard about quite a few of them. There are a lot of diseases. So there's the mites. Now picture you have a bed bug. How many of you have had bed bugs? Okay, so we have a sympathetic and a brave group. Great. So picture having a bed bug about the size of a squirrel on you, and that's what it's like if you're a honeybee. These are enormous for the size of their body, and that's just one of them. And they can have multiple mites on them. Now, the mites are sucking blood, as bed bugs do. Remember, they're in the same taxon as bed bugs. But by doing so, they're also a vector for disease, bloodborne diseases, for example, like the wing deformity virus and other viruses. We also have some other viruses, some other fungal infections that are killing the bees. But these are the proximate causes of death. These are not the real causes of death. It's sort of like if you argue these are the real causes of death and you ignore the other causes such as overwork, chemical onslaught, etc. It's really like saying, look how many people are dying of pneumonia. We should focus all of our energy on pneumonia because it's clearly a very serious and deadly disease. while ignoring the fact that most of the people dying of pneumonia have a cancer or human immunodeficiency virus or some other their immune systems are otherwise compromised. It's the same thing with the bees. These are proximate causes, but they're not really the main cause. So the main causes, of course, being overwork. They're being trucked around all year around now. We used to use them only seasonally. We're also feeding them high fructose corn syrup in many cases instead of them having access to their own honey. And so they don't get the nutrition that they used to have. And of course, then there's the chemical onslaught. So all the pesticides, herbicides, etc., that are out there. And just so you are aware, it's not only the European honeybee that's experiencing a decline. We're actually seeing declines in some of the wild pollinators as well. And in particular, if you can advance to the next one, we're also seeing a decline in bombus species. So bombus being the genus of bumblebee. And bumblebees are also really important for a lot of our food crops, especially in greenhouse situations, for example, where you can't use the honeybee because of the polarized light. We have to use the bumblebee. Yeah, thanks. So what are we doing about this? Well, we have some international measures. We have some government guidelines and regulations now. As Carol mentioned, I'm trying to get pollinators recognized and protected under the NAFTA CEC and other governmental bodies under environmental impact assessments, etc. However, the CBD already does recognize the value of pollinators and pollination. But like most regulations and guidelines, they've been, well, about as effective as most regulations and guidelines, i.e. as effective as most non-market-based approaches, not very. So what are we really doing? Next. Fortunately, we have the situation where we actually have the farmers and everyone else involved fully invested in doing something because their livelihoods depend upon it. So they're very interested and they come to our meetings. So what can we do? We can work them less. We can just use them, for example, once a season. We can give them better conditions, better food, lessened chemical load. That's a big one. And the main way we can do that, if you look at this chart, is we use a backpack sprayer and at night. And this gives a targeted dose of the chemical rather than just this blanket spraying that's been shown to be really, really detrimental, not only to the European honeybee and other pollinators that we're using in agriculture, but also for all of the organisms involved. So, okay, next. And the other thing we're doing, of course, is that we're trying to change our practices. So we're having pollinator strips put into these industrial farms. This has been shown to help dramatically because, as you can imagine, these invertebrates, much like you, can't just eat once a season. Most of these large farms are producing one crop that typically flowers once a season. So there's nothing to eat for the entire rest of the year. So it should not be surprising to us that they've gone elsewhere. And overall, if we keep putting in these larger farms, they will decline. So we can add some heterogeneity. So we can have forest patches. Forest patches have been shown to dramatically increase the number of wild pollinators. And overall, what we can really do with the decline in honeybee is not only work them less, but rely more on these wild pollinators. We've done a few studies and we've seen a 25% increase in yield with the addition of wild pollinators. This is incredible in an area where, as you know, in farming, profit margins are typically pretty slim. So a 25% yield certainly has everyone's attention, and it's certainly a viable approach. So how do we do that? We have forest patches. We have pollinator strips within the farm so that we have this heterogeneity. We have more food to eat over a season. Next. And now, finally, in my own research, I have found that leaving fine woody debris, or dead wood, if you wish to call it that, the wood that's left from forest harvest, for example, in a plantation situation. Remember, these plantations are often close to where we have farms. We don't, for transport reasons, etc., we don't typically put them very far away. Also, we want them to grow fast. We want to minimize the footprint we're using for forestry and leave the rest of it for conservation land. And so we're trying to have them grow as fast as possible, so we have them more in the south, at least here, in the lower latitudes. And so for that reason, it makes sense to ensure that the wild pollinators are maintained in those areas so that they can then go into these industrial farms or even smaller scale farms. So the presence of the forest harvest residue in these plantation situations ensures, in fact, that flowering plants are abundant. So what I found, for example, is in a plantation situation where you don't leave the forest harvest residue, you take it away for bioenergy, which is what is of interest right now, you have very few flowering plants. Without flowering plants, we're not going to have pollinators. Without pollinators, we're not going to have fruit, and we're therefore going to have overall lower biodiversity also in these forested landscapes. So we're not going to have the birds, we're not going to have the large carnivores, we're not going to have those animals dispersing the fruits anymore, and so therefore we'll have a lower plant diversity overall again. So the presence of at least leaving some of this forest harvest residue, this wood, as piles ensures the presence of flowering plants and therefore the presence of pollinators and frugivores, and you can go ahead, overall increased growth and increased flower abundance in the very few animal pollinated species that we actually have in the boreal. And the next one, and this is including cherry and also, go ahead, and also raspberry, which are two of the most important fruit crops in the boreal. So these wood piles, as aggregated piles, ensure that biodiversity is maintained, and also at the same time that the populations of our more wild pollinators that can help us rely less on the European honeybee are also maintained in the areas that we need them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melanie. That was great. Let's have questions for Melanie about pollinators, the bee crisis, other topics. Yes, Peter.
I thought you were closing off there. Someone had to do something.
I'm prone to do that.
So thank you very much. That was great. It's a very good presentation. I was at the CBD Substa a month ago. Right? I don't know if you managed to get there, but definitely the pollinators were on the table. And they'll be on the table in South Korea next year for the COP. Right? But it did strike me as a distant observer that the link with pesticides has got everyone scared out of their minds, right? And
yes.
As you might know, Europe has moved to ban certain types of pesticides now, and particularly those that affect bees.
Mm-hmm. The neonicotinoids, yes.
Yes, right. Mm-hmm. And there are already talks of certain chemical companies suing the European Union if they're going ahead with this. There's talk of the WTO case between the U.S. and the EU on this, yet another issue. Maybe you could comment a bit on that, sort of the political power of the chemical industry and how it manages to shake the foundations of these institutions.
Yes, well, that's interesting. In fact, the company that produces most of these neonicotinoids is in fact Bayer.
Yeah.
Bayer is, of course, a German company, but recently these same neonicotinoids have been banned in Germany. But the main thing is that obviously they're making a lot of money off of these chemicals, and so they're trying to protect themselves and trying to point more to the proximate causes of death. And that's why I feel it's important to point out that the cause of the decline may be seemingly these mites and diseases, etc., but the real causes are in fact the onslaught of chemicals that's disrupting their nervous system and the overwork, etc. Now, what we have here in North America is a situation where we haven't been able to get pollinators protected under the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, Commission on Environmental Cooperation, simply because the three members of the NAFTA CEC are the Minister of Environment of Canada, the Minister of Environment of Mexico, but in the United States, it's the head of the EPA. And because it's the head of the EPA in the United States, they have to be very, very cautious. It's basically, I don't know if you've you're familiar with the EPA, but it's highly, there are a lot of legalities involved, and they have to be very, very careful in terms of lawsuits, etc. So things have been moving very, very slowly, mainly for that reason. It's in fact due to the legalities surrounding the banning of these chemicals by the EPA. Now, as for your question as to why this has been slower in Europe, for me it seems like it's moving much, it's better than here. We do have these lawsuits. We have had them banned, in fact, in quite a few countries. So I think it's actually moving quite quickly.
Oh yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, in Europe. But here, this is the main reason why we haven't seen as much progress. And as of course you're aware, the United States is one of the, I think, only 2 countries that has not signed the Convention on Biological Diversity also.
If they show up.
Okay, I think we're just going to take one more question here because we're going to move on to the next panel. Actually, well, maybe we'll do.
Right, yeah, I'll do quick. Hi, Melanie. My name is
Hi.
Patricia. I really enjoyed your presentation. Just on your last 2 slides there, talking about different feedstocks for biodiversity. I wonder, what would you think on because there's such competition and there's kind of a catch-22 for a push for renewable energy, but then biodiversity is also there. Would you say leave the forests alone completely?
Oh, that's a very good question, and I didn't really get into that because I wanted it to be more, relevant to the food security panel. But in fact, I'm not actually saying that we should leave everything there. My research is about how the forest harvest residue should be distributed. And yes, we do need to leave some of it. Now, we don't really know yet how much we need to leave. The guess is we need to leave around 20-25 tons per hectare in order to ensure biodiversity. But what's interesting is that until this work, it's sort of been assumed that forest harvest residue should be left dispersed, i.e. evenly distributed. And nobody's talked about the importance of the spatial distribution of the amount that we actually leave. So yes, maybe it should be 20 tons per hectare that we should leave, and we can take the rest to burn in a cogenerational facility. This is a sustainable use of this energy. But how should we leave that 20 tons that we're leaving on site? Should it be piled? Should it be dispersed? Should it be a mix? I've definitely shown that if you're a flowering plant and therefore a pollinator or a frugivore or pretty much anything else, it's really, really beneficial to leave it as aggregated, i.e. as piled. And so probably what we're looking at is at a landscape level, sometimes we should leave some as piles, and sometimes we should leave it as dispersed because there are other organisms that benefit more from a dispersed distribution of the slash or the forest harvest residue.
Okay, I think I'm going to let the other people talk at the break, just because we have a whole other panel that we have to get to. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
Okay, so first off, I'm really honored to be moderating the panel on gender, women's issues and development. This panel has a unique place in our symposium just because as women are continuously marginalized in a lot of facets of our society today, discussions and advocacy of human rights and sustainability all provide a vehicle for women empowerment. And so with that, I would like to turn the floor to Edith. Goudreau. Yeah, okay. Lavelle, and she is right now pursuing a major in poli-science and a minor in diversity and contemporary world at Concordia University. She's an active participant in human rights advocacy through her role in Amnesty International, and then she also is actually the Loyola College Student Association the president of Loyola College Student Association. And Edith will be presenting on the topic of child marriage and its effects on human rights and sustainability. So,
thank you. Just gonna look more comfortable. Hi everyone. Today my presentation is based on a series of pictures which has been taken from the photo exhibit called Too Young to Wed, created by the American photojournalist Stephanie Sinclair. I had the privilege to work as an intern last summer at the Montreal office of Amnesty International, and we've been able to bring that photo exhibit in Montreal for more than a month. The fact that I've encountered those pictures gave me the idea today to present, to raise awareness in my own way about this controversial practice, and I'll try to present you the devastating consequences of it. So, no, sorry. So I'll first introduce you with the first picture, portraying two couples. The little girl in the pink dress is called Tehani. The picture has been taken in Yemen, actually. Tehani in that picture is 8 years old, but she has been married at the age of 6. Her husband in that picture is 27. What is striking about this picture is obviously the age difference, but also the seriousness of it, which gave the impression that both children have lost their innocence, and we can see that by the look of their eyes and the general physical expression. So I'll start by giving you a quick definition of what child marriage is. Child marriage occurs when one or both of the spouses are below the age of 18. There are 3 core reasons why child marriage still exists nowadays. The first one is an economic reason. It's related to poverty. Most child marriage occurs in poor rural areas. The justification of the family is usually related to monetary exchange. So the father is taking the dowries to feed the rest of the family. There's also the illusion that the daughter or the son will be better off in a new family, which is usually not true because the other family is as poor as his. The justification of the husband family is usually related to basically to domestic slavery. They want to have the youngest girl or boy as possible so they can raise them the way they want, as a slave in the field or as a perfect wife in the house. The second reason is a cultural one. Child marriage is practiced all over the world, even here, even in US. Actually, the photo exhibit was presenting 5 different countries, which are Yemen, Afghanistan, India, Nepal, and Ethiopia, which shows the diversity of culture and also of religion, such as Hinduism, Islam, and Ethiopian Orthodox, which leads me to the third reasons, which is a religious tradition. Obviously, religion is involved in that practice, but the practice is not inherent to any of them. It's really important to make this distinction so we don't stigmatize any religion in particular. The second picture portrays Prakash, 16 years old, and Sumina, 15 years old, in Nepal. It portrays the second kind of child marriage that occurs usually. The first one was between a young girl and a really older man. The second one is between 2 children. The picture also portrays the gifts given during the marriage, and also the forced practice of it, since obviously both of them seemed really unhappy about it. Which leads me to the fact that we have not done much research about how the consequences of child marriage on boys, but we assume that it's the same, it's similar ones as for the girls. So obviously the family forced them to quit school, which leads to a lack of education, which leads to a lack of skilled labor, and an unsustainable economy within the community and the society in general. There's also psychological repercussions and societal ills, such as marital violence and maternal health at risk. I gave some examples here. I don't have time to talk about it. We can talk about it during the discussion session. What is already implemented to prevent child marriage? Obviously, in international law terms, child marriage is a human rights violation. There are 2 conventions that are more specific to the practice: the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. According to those 2 international treaties, child marriage is a serious human rights violation, which entails this unsustainable power structure by a dominant figure who's forcing, which means that there's no voluntary consent, because there's a distinction to make here, because usually what happens is the children, that he or she says that she's consenting, but usually it's a forced consent. So it's a dominant figure who's forcing a child to marry. So both conventions have been signed and ratified by the countries, by the 5 countries represented in the photo exhibit. Obviously, that leads to the question of the institutionalization of the law and the application of it, which usually is completely different, and makes me think that sometimes law is not enough, which is portrayed in that case of the little Rajani, 5 years old, in India. In India, child marriage is illegal. So what happens usually is they'll do some clandestine ceremonies during the night with several ceremonies marrying children together. Here you see Rajani with in the arms of her uncle. So to prove that sometimes laws are not enough, I have some statistics. The most striking one is as of right now, the number of young women between 20 and 24 who has been married before the age of 18 is estimated at 67 million. And if there's nothing if nothing's changed, the United Nations Population Fund has estimates that by 2020 there will be 142 million innocent young girls forced to marry. I wanted to talk a bit about sustainability. Obviously, the child marriage practice is an unsustainable practice, which leads to a repercussion on the economic well-being of the society where child marriage is practiced. From what I told you, the lack of skilled labor and obviously the economic prosperity is at risk, and also to a lot of social injustice as the forcing young children to marry and also not take control of their lives. There's short-term and long-term themes I personally think should be implemented. But the short-term needs are related to group support for those who try to escape a child marriage, and also to those who are still victim of it. We have to raise awareness and education to help them have less stigmatization about what's going on in their life. The long-term needs are the reintegration of the victims within the society and a stronger commitment to treaties, and I believe it should have a fixed legal age for marriage, which is not in any of the convention because countries are not agreeing on any fixed legal age. I wanted to conclude with this inspiring story of the little Nojoud Ali. She's living in Yemen. Nojoud has been married at the age of 8 by her father, but she succeeded to get her divorce at the age of 10. At some day, her mom gave her some money and to get bread, and she decided to take that money, take a bus, a taxi, and go to the court of justice. Wait there the whole day for someone to notice her. At some point, the judge came and said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "I want to get my divorce." And so obviously her story has been really publicized. One of the few women lawyers in Yemen support her and get her to her divorce. I think it's an inspiring story because obviously it gives hope, and I hope it could also raise awareness around the world about this issue and make a difference by empowering young women and young men to take control of their lives. And yeah, so that's
So we're actually going to hold questions off until the end of the second panel discussion. But now we're going to talk we're going to have the pleasure of being given a presentation by Valentina Luqueta, is that how you pronounce it? Who is currently a candidate for a master's degree in international human rights law at the American University in Cairo. Right now, her focus has primarily been concerning gender balance in the construction of constitutions. Previously, she's worked, and this is primarily in the Middle East. So previously, she's worked on in-depth research and analysis of women's rights, leadership roles, and access to political participation. So we're really fortunate to have her expertise as a part of this panel.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much for having me. I forgot how cold feels, I have to say. I came from t-shirts to 3-4 layers of sweaters. It was a welcome change for about 2 days, and today has definitely taken me by surprise. And I'm fortunate enough to be in such a great company. All the presentations so far have been so inspiring. I think the presentation before me was well placed, especially because of what my colleague mentioned, that law is not enough. And it's quite an interesting way to start the presentation on gender-based constitutional design, especially in the context of Egyptian transitional post-revolutionary times that we're finding ourselves in. As many, I'm sure you know through the media presentation, that this summer in June we had yet another revolution in Egypt, where yet another president was ousted and replaced with yet another transitional government that outlined a transitionary map towards yet another constitution. For constitutional lawyers like myself, it was a gift that we never expected to receive yet again, because the constitution that was put in place in 2012 was not something that we found satisfactory. However, the bubble was burst very quickly when the Constitutional Committee was formed and the process started, because it signaled that nothing has really changed. It also signaled that revolution that we also adored and admired has potentially come to a stagnating point. That the emotions and uplifting feeling of change that we all witnessed, Carol and I particularly, in Tahrir in 2011 and yet again in Tahrir 2013, has potentially left the building. And that's unfortunate, but it's also part of the process of changing something that has been in place for 30 plus years. In that context, I, again, carried by this emotional charge that surrounded me, strive to locate my interest, locate my passion, because as a white, non-Middle Eastern person in Egypt, you find yourself often questioning, is this my place, and how do I contribute, or should I contribute in the first place? And there I locate the gender-based constitutional design as something that I'm passionate about and somewhere where I can contribute without being at the forefront of marches, protests, and any other more so forward ways of participating. What's really important to note is that constitutional design is absolutely masculine. Canadian Constitution, which is one of the best in the world, is quite masculine. I'm sorry to say that. So is the U.S. Constitution that is celebrated. So is the French. If we were in a different conference, maybe led by lawyers, or God forbid, compared to constitutional lawyers, this panel would be filled with white old men, and women's point of view would be irrelevant, or not engaged with whatsoever. This is particularly a case today when talking about Egyptian constitutional transition. It's filled with older Egyptian men who find women's rights to be coupled within the broader concept of human rights, or something that it's not the time and place to talk about. We have better things to do. We need to get the economy going. We have all these poor people. Women's rights, you should just take a back seat. Obviously blind to the context and multidimensional issue that women's rights carry. 40% of illiterate in Egypt are women. 40% of women-held households are also 30% of the economic contribution. So women play different roles. And one thing that you learn stepping into metro, women's car metro in Egypt, is that these women are strong. And they'll literally push physically past you in order to get what they want. This is something that is not often portrayed through the news. Women in the Middle East particularly, but in Egypt specifically these days, portrayed as weak, not able to participate, and not able to contribute. And many experiences that we have had on the ground prove the otherwise. Women bravely participated in all the protests through July 2013, even though at every single protest, every time there were 40 plus physical attacks, 2 or 3 of them per day rapes, literally surrounded by 200 men, into a frenzy that is terrifying and horrifying. And women yet again, the next day, went into the square and defended their right to be there, to participate. Unfortunately, the power that women held on the streets was not translated in a formal political process. For some reason, and I think the answer to that is quite obvious, they're unable to harness the power they have on the streets and the position and the leadership they had in the squares into a political process to which they would make significant changes to the political structure. This is not only with women, this is also with youth and the religious minorities, which also signals to another yet so not good news, and that is the revolution wasn't really a revolution. And often you are conflicted with what kind of vocabulary to use, because while the system supposedly changed, the process itself has not. This leads me to a transitional period that's taking place right now. This morning, so late afternoon, in Cairo, the Constitutional Assembly that is coming to the end of its task to write yet another constitution basically said that the military has rights to military trials of the civilians. The military is not by any means responsible to the Constitution or to the government, while the police is. So we're back to square one. We're back to the beginning. And that's an issue that within which the women's rights operate. In respect to what we expect and what we are hoping for that will come out of this process is unfortunately not a lot. The mechanisms and the institutions with which the Constitution itself will outline are unfortunately limited. The starting point in July 2013, once Morsi was ousted by the military council and replaced by the transitional government, again appointed by the military council, as you can tell there's a little pattern and trend we're going towards here, decided to reform the 2012 Constitution, which is very important as a starting point because the idea of rights, responsibilities, liberties has already been contextually locked in 2012. And has been contextually locked by a Constitutional Assembly that was everything but inclusive. It was predominantly Muslim Brotherhood. It had only 5 women. Most of the liberal parties walked out of the Constitutional Assemblies. They did not participate in the process out of political move, basically to discredit Muslim Brotherhood. That didn't really work out for them very well. The Constitutional Assembly that was formed afterwards, meaning in September 2013, was also not inclusive. It was another political move. It had no religious representatives from the side of Muslim Brotherhood. Had only 5 women yet again. And political parties that considered themselves liberal yet again said, no, it's not time for women's rights. So we're not very hopeful, unfortunately. But we are hopeful that there could be another constitutional process in 2014. We tend to do this yearly, so who knows. I'll just very briefly, because this project is quite extensive, and one can talk about constitutions in depth and not always with an interesting tone, because they tend to be quite vague, distant, mechanical. Lawyers like to use words that conceptualize rights in a very boring manner. So in order to avoid all of that and not bore you to death, I'll just mention a couple of contesting points. Islam is always on the table, and I'm sure it's in everybody's mind. Egypt has, through his own history, in comparison to other countries that surround it, mainly Libya and Tunisia, that are going through the similar process and they have gone through the revolution as well. And Syria, hopefully, very soon, will go through a process that's not as bloody. Egypt has struggled with the identity, and it has a lot to do with the post-colonial context in which the political climate operates at the moment. And Islam is presented as part of that identity. Unfortunately, it has been locked on women's body. So every single time there's a talk of Islam, the Salafis come on the street, they raise their hands in the air and start shouting left and right how women's body represents Islam, how she should abide by certain rules and regulations because this is what Egypt is, this is who we are, and how dare you coming from the outside to tell us anything differently. This obviously contextualizes women's rights, again, within this context of religion. Very difficult to break through, very difficult to negotiate, and also very difficult to move past that, to actually talk about substance, to talk about how can we get a female president, how can we get more women in the parliament, how can we make sure that the government includes more female ministers, and most importantly, how can we represent women's interests within the policies and laws of the country. That's the context which has not been properly addressed, and there's a reason for it. They're not talking about Islam anymore. It was a conversation of 2011. They're talking about mechanics in order to avoid it. So that's not going to be solved. The Article 2, which says that Sharia, Islamic law, is the or a source of legislation, will remain. What has not also been addressed and may not seem directly to be a gender issue is the military. Military is an inherently masculine institution, and there's no way for a woman to advance in the military. There's no way for women to participate in the military. While this is contextually different in different countries, it's specifically important in Egypt, where the military controls not only 70% of the economy, but the political process itself. So the military will remain at the forefront. At the moment, it's celebrated, loved, and adored as an institution. And as such, that's Egyptians' right to remain with that. But it has a very particular gender dimension that has not at all been addressed. Most importantly, it has influence on how females are conceptualized as legal subjects. So within that concept, these two things will always remain as barriers that stagnate the process. So the mechanics of quotas, electoral systems, parliamentary versus presidential remain almost insignificant in comparison to these two obstacles that contextualize the process itself. I would just want to finish with the fact that Egyptian women remain hopeful. There's a very strong grassroots movement. Yet again, they are out in the streets protesting every day to make sure that they can at least occupy one political forum that they have access to, and that is the streets. And these are powerful individuals as well as the groups, and the process is fluid and it's moving forward. It will take some time, but I think with every passing step up the political transition, they are getting more and more access, and I guess that's the most important part. So I remain hopeful, which is not a generalist atmosphere in Egypt at the moment, unfortunately. So, thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Now we'll move on to Dr. Tanya Warnicki? Yes. Yeah? Okay, awesome. She's a Fulbright scholar at McGill University, where her research is primarily focused on economic aspects in regards to gender. And she plays an active role as not only a scholar, but also an assistant professor. And her topic this morning was and gender as an issue to us. Dr. Warnicki is going to stay after the presentation, but she'll be attending the symposium tomorrow. So if you have any questions, you could just jot them down and wait until tomorrow.
Thanks so much. It's really my pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank Fulbright Canada, as well as Carol and Concordia for hosting this wonderful event. So it's my pleasure to be here in Montreal this term. My home state is Florida, so like the previous speaker, I'm adjusting to bundling up in many layers. So with just 10 minutes, today I'm going to talk about one snapshot of a much larger research project I've been working on about female entrepreneurship in the developing world, and particularly in China and India. So I'm going to talk very briefly some characteristics of female entrepreneurship, specifically female entrepreneurship programs to assist women in their entrepreneurial activities. And I'm going to zoom in on microfinance, one of the most popular forms of entrepreneurship programs for women. But instead of focusing my presentation on addressing, say, gender gaps in entrepreneurship, which I've done a lot of research on in the past, I want to focus today on the linkage between entrepreneurship programs and the community. So I'm going to talk about ways to improve those links in terms of microfinance and give some specific examples of community building programs. So, first of all, we must acknowledge that the gender dimension of entrepreneurship has long been understudied. Basically, the popular press, particularly in the developing world, highlights these individual success stories of these heroine millionaires, which are not representative at all of most female entrepreneurs. In fact, in almost every country around the world, women are more likely to be a specific type of entrepreneur known as a necessity entrepreneur. These types of entrepreneurs are not the ones that see an opportunity and have the resources and expertise to just seize it and capitalize on it. Necessity entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs because they don't have other options and they need to sustain their own livelihoods. These types of entrepreneurs predominate in the informal sector, the unmeasured, unregulated sector of the economy, and women are more likely to be entrepreneurs in this sector for a variety of reasons. In most countries, they have less education, they have less networking access, they have less access to financial resources, and this type of entrepreneurship is not associated with upward mobility. So, that being said, how does entrepreneurship policy relate to women? So, basically, entrepreneurship programs in developing countries highlight a completely different form of entrepreneurship, the opportunity entrepreneur, the type of idealized entrepreneur that particularly in the West we focus upon. So the emphasis is on upper income, highly educated professionals, which may in fact be internationally competitive at what they do. Again, non-representative of women entrepreneurship. Also, these programs really don't have clear linkages to the community. There's often no give-back programs of any kind. So production and exchange are facilitated, but there's not really any emphasis on collectivity or participatory decision-making. Also, because of the individualistic approach of these programs, they tend to channel women towards this kind of idealized, individualistic, detached persona rather than someone embedded in and participating in their own community. Now, microfinance is often discussed as an exception. So, just to quickly, review what most of you probably already know about microfinance. It extends to poorer women without collateral or formal bank access, so it does reach necessity entrepreneurs. The loan recipient is often part of a small group, and often the loan recipient is not exclusively responsible for paying back the loan. So there's a joint liability approach wherein if one member of the group cannot pay back her loan, the other members of the group have to pay it back for her. Now there's pros and cons to this. It does lead to careful selection of group members. It can lead to a tightly knit group, and it does facilitate payback if the social pressure really works in various cultures. However, is this really participatory? Well, service delivery is not necessarily participatory. The group members generally don't arrange or vote on the rules by which the group operates. Women, in fact, don't always have input over the use of their loans. They may receive the money, but often the male in the household actually controls where the money is spent. Often the groups are homogenous, and because of the joint liability feature, groups consciously exclude the poorest. There's no clear effort to include women at upper levels of governance at the organizational level. And just because you're in a group, procuring loans, that doesn't mean you're automatically going to be questioning all sorts of social hierarchies that you're surrounded by. And there's also not really very much strength in participatory forms of assessment. Oftentimes, the success of a program is based on kind of just numbers, how many women receive a loan, and that may not reflect women's actual experiences in the program at all. Also, is it community building? Well, kind of, but increased interdependence also has some real challenges when you apply it to particularly very vulnerable groups. We can see a lot of examples of this. No time to really delve into this in detail, but for example, a spate of suicides in India based on social pressure to pay back loans, or domestic violence increases in situations where women are detained for not paying their loans. And also the focus on women for microfinance, while it has some very important reasons for doing that, it also tends to foster male resentment, and it's harder to get male buy-in if they feel they're being excluded from this form of financial access. There's tension at the operational level as for-profit microfinance increases, and we see the tendency to focus just on whether someone can sell their product, not on what kind of product the community could actually benefit from the most. And sure, again, there's a community of microfinance loan recipients, but we have to acknowledge it's a less powerful community than the formal bank finance community, so we might question that as well. Fortunately, there are some things that can be done. Number one, we could establish a system of participatory consultation. Now, I must emphasize here, this is very complex. It requires a lot more organizational structure than exists in almost all microfinance operations around the world. And the questions that I have on the slide are just a few. There's a list of about 20 questions that would really be involved in considering, who controls and participates in various aspects of the delivery process. You need trainers, you need trained facilitators, you need a lot more money so you can actually go out and reach the poorest of the poor. And if you really want to think about strategic loans, what benefits the community the most, then you can't have a group of 5 women trying to decide what's best for the entire community. You'd have to somehow reach out to the community and get them involved. Number 2, microfinance for cooperatives. Why not change the whole risk model? Instead of joint liability, what about what the working world does? They only work with companies that are cooperatives, and they only require that the cooperatives pay back successfully placed investments. Think about that. You're giving a loan, you're not going to get paid back if the investment is not successful. You're an active partner now, you're going to have much more skin in the game to try to make sure that that business is going to be successful in its endeavor. Next idea, move past the credit-only model. A couple examples here. You can blend microfinance with mutual aid, cooperatives, all sorts of community-driven programs like Social Security, healthcare, etc., childcare. The trick here is that you don't want to totally supplant the role of the government, right? You need to also be driving the government to support social protection, recognition of the informal sector, etc., while creating short-term strategies to support needs now. Lots of other approaches. You can have cooperative models where even sole proprietorships can band together, sharing risks and rewards. You can have microfinance only for social businesses. You can have all sorts of corporate and nonprofit partnerships, either started from the top down or the ground up, as you see some examples there. The main point is that there's not just one way that we can reach out to the community from female entrepreneurship programs. And finally, we can't forget the basics, right? I've moved past the whole discussion here, just assuming that women are going to be able to be entrepreneurs and participate in these programs, and now let's focus on the community. Well, we have to realize that there are a whole lot of institutional issues that prevent women from being entrepreneurs in the first place. So I've listed several here. I've just written a policy brief that addresses these in more detail, so if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to share that with you. I wanted to leave you with my email address so we can hopefully talk about this later. Thanks a lot.
All right, so to wrap up the second panel, Rosna Shershen will be giving a presentation on discussing a particular field study of clean cook stoves for women's development in Nepal. She conducted a report on certain capacity building projects through sustainable development here in Nepal. Rosna is currently pursuing a Master's of Environment and Business at the University of Waterloo. And recently she's spent a lot of time, she has a lot of experience in nonprofit and the federal Canadian government sectors. So let's give it to Rosna.
Well, thank you all very much. I'm delighted to be here speaking at the panel today on women's rights and human development, and also on sustainability. My presentation will be on a case study that was done by me on clean cook stoves, and this is regarding women's development in Nepal, and it was an NGO I was associated with, and it was called Integrated Development Society. So to start off, I'll be giving up the introduction, and then I'll be looking into the sustainability factors, so the criteria that I measured the report with, which is economic, social, and environmental. So these are the 3 tiers of sustainability. Then I'll present my key findings and go on with the conclusion. And this presentation actually ties in really well with what Dr. Warnicki just gave. So it's about everything. It's about microfinance, it's about women's development, it's also about human rights, and it's also about international development in general. So firstly, to start off, I'm going to give you a brief definition of the 2 terminologies I'm going to be using the most. It's going to be biobriquette and bone marrow. Okay. So firstly, what is biobriquette? Biobriquette is a form of bioenergy that is obtained from bone marrow. And bone marrow is actually a plant. It is a type of forest killer weed. So it just grows in abundance, and once it actually starts growing, it destroys the crop yield as a whole. So people are trying to get rid of this in the communities that is affected by bone marrow. And biobriquette, what it does is basically it utilizes bone marrow. It's what you do is you pick up the plants, and then you dry it out, and you make it into a clay-like thing, a briquette, and you can use it for cooking and also to heat up your household. So if you just go on to the next page, you will see this is the grinder that is used for drying the leaves and then making it thinner. And on the next slide, you can see that I was taking a survey with a girl, I guess, they're women in the community. And so the project area I focused on was Bishankunarayan in Nepal. And this was actually one of the first model that was applied with the help of UNDP. This was a case study, basically, so how to utilize bone marrow. And this project was actually, after completion in 2005, replicated in many parts of Asia, including India and Bangladesh, and recently also in Africa. So this model has been very popularized. So the most profound, I'll look into the sustainability effects or impacts of this report. So firstly, going on to economic factor, when I conducted the survey, which was all with the women of the village, and like Dr. Warnicki also already said, that it was kind of like it's not an opportunity-based entrepreneurship, but more a necessity one. So the women participated because they were mostly the women in the community were the ones that would gather firewood for cooking purposes, and they were the ones who were staying at home, so they had the most time, and they needed to utilize time and on the side just gain more money, right? So so when the project went in, obviously they delved into it because of the necessity factor. So upon completing my survey, what I found out was that in economic terms, people really enjoyed it because their farming income was mostly based on whatever crops they yielded within a month. So they had to wait for the product to be available and then sell it, and then it depends on the weather and weather pattern and everything. Second of all, they said that their extra time was well utilized when this project was brought forth, because they could, bone marrow was available everywhere, so they could just pluck it up and then put good use of time rather than having to walk all the way to gather the firewood, which took more time. And second of all, they also said that this project helped them earn extra money, so it led to more independence for them, and they didn't have to rely on their husband for every little single household purchases, and they were happy that they could provide their children with some lunch money to go to school. Second of all, so now when we look into the social aspects, like what kind of social implications the project had, we could see that there was community savings made. So now there is a revolving fund that has been established after this project was completed. It actually phased out. It was a one-year project, and it phased out. And what I went and did was a post-project assessment on what kind of improvements that the community had seen, and if they had any recommendations for NGO, because this project was being replicated. So now we can focus on, okay, women could form, they had like lots of advantages on women, and I solely focused the report more on like, reflecting what women gained. So it was, the project helped improve their self-confidence. They learned how to form meetings, get more engaged within the community, bring forth their ideas. And also after the completion of this project, since they started selling their biobriquettes out to like bigger cities, they had to do bookkeeping, and so they needed to see like how many products were being distributed and transferred into another city. So they all were kind of forced to learn like how to read and write a little bit. So women who were previously shy came forward because they had to do their bookkeeping. They even learned how to sign their names by even asking their school-going children. And also, there's introductions of skill development programs. So while this project was brought forth there, they also did other training stuff, just like like pickle making, and then also sewing, knitting classes, which was like extra stuff. Okay, and lastly, I looked into the environmental factors. So obviously, it helped in forestry development because once Bun Mara was uprooted, what eventually ended up happening is that the natural environment was back in the game. So the trees were growing now, and then there was more crop yield, and so there was a positive impact in the forest system. And also inside the households, there was less smoke. There were cleaner clothes for people. There was no need to for women, one of the problems was that since they're using firewood, they had to constantly stay near the fire, so that there is no fire concern or anything like that. So they had to stay near the fire. And now, since biobriquette, it just burns, and it will fall into ashes at the end. So you don't really have to tend to it the whole time. Another great thing about it is that there's no smoke. There's no smoke produced, and I don't know if anybody has been in an environment where you're inside a kitchen where people use firewood to cook food, but it's mind-boggling. It actually tears up your eyes so much because they're in a room, a confined room, and usually these small in small villages, they don't have windows in their kitchen, so you're inside this enclosed room, and then there's just wood burning, so your eyes you tear up, you can't breathe properly, and I was personally appalled. I never knew how scary the situation could be, and it teared up my eyes. I was actually coughing. I had to get out right after not even 5 minutes into the burning of the firewood. So, and I don't know how the women do it there, because they cook their dinner, everything inside that little enclosed kitchen. So obviously there's less smoke, cleaner clothes, and also it contributed to better health. And mostly the concern was with children, really little children, and elderly, because they suffered from bronchitis most of the times, and it was mostly due to exposure of firewood smoke during the day and night. And it contributed to pollution-free environment. So since this project also was implemented by UNDP, at that time they were focusing on Millennium Development Goal number 7, that was to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, and this project encapsulated all those things together. And my project is pretty long, it's a 23-page report, so there's so much more I could talk about, but to keep it short and just to focus and highlight more on sustainability and women's development, I kept it brief. And so these were the women I interviewed. And they're also the biobriquette users in the community. And so what were my key findings from the project? I found that women drudgery was significantly reduced, because now they didn't have to travel a lot to get the firewood back to their home, and they were able to utilize the bun mara that was found in the village. There was significant improvement on the issue of deforestation. There was one cool finding was that they like to use biobriquette a lot, but it took time to burn. So if you were in a rush in the early morning, when everybody's going to school, you wouldn't wake up early, 5 o'clock early in the morning, to to keep it burning. So in the wintertime, they loved it because in the wintertime, it would also produce heat. So the woman would wake up early in the morning and then like start cooking there. But in the summer, they kind of preferred their old traditional firewood just because it was faster for a morning rush. There was significant improvement on the issue of deforestation in that project area. There was decreased indoor air pollution noted. Biobriquette was also most preferred for cooking purposes, followed by heating room during the winter season. And finally, this was quite cool. Like I really, I never thought like I would have found this, but one of the women told me that the ash that was produced at the end of the burning of the whole briquette, it was an excellent source for manure, and it could be used for flower pots and kitchen gardening, and also it could be used as a dishwashing agent for copper and brass utensils, and that's what the villagers mostly use in that project area. So, like when I think about it, it's like a life cycle approach. So, you know, you're actually taking like natural source of plants, making this biobriquette, and you know, utilizing it in a good manner, like getting all the energy source out of it, and in the end, like it leaves no residue, right? Like so you can use it, and it just goes back into the nature. So there is that whole life cycle thing like going in. So I thought it was really cool. And finally, on my conclusion part, I would like to say that while most of my research work was done in the field site, I only wrote the report at the NGO itself. Surveying members of the household in the community, and I gained wonderful insights on whether or not the project had achieved its goal. I looked into economic, social, behavioral, environmental factors for that project assessment purpose. And through the survey response I received from the community members and all the one-on-one discussions I led, it can be concluded that Biobriquette project was successfully implemented, and it passed components of both sustainability and women's development. And also, if anybody wants to learn more about it, you can just type it CNN International, and they did a video coverage of Bishanku Narayan, which was my project site, and you can find more information about it, and it has been replicated in other regions of the world as well. So I think overall it was a good success, and just so that I don't make it all a success story, I would like to say that the villagers were concerned about like a few things, and one of them was that a lot of 3 people before me had went in there to do a brief study. And what they wanted was that the villagers were happy that it was being studied, but they also wanted a copy of the report, because usually what happened was foreigners would go there and they would do all this survey components and everything, but they wouldn't come back. They went back with a report and they did not know what was going on. And for me, why I embarked on this project was due to my own interest. I contacted this NGO, and because I had just taken a course on how to do field work in international development studies in my 3rd year of undergraduate studies, I contacted this because I learned about all these methods and procedures, and I actually went and followed the guideline from that book one by one. Even wrote up a consent letter, and I had a translator going in with me because I wanted to have a really ethical research. And so my survey was actually translated in Nepali as well. And I asked them, they all, whoever I surveyed, they all gave me the consent, and I actually promised them that I would come back with the report. So after the 1.5 months I was there, 2 days before I left, I completed my whole report. I submitted my report to the village, and then I also submitted all the pictures that I had taken there, and I got back home. And that's my project. Thank you very much.
There's probably more study to do to really fix the legal age and decide, is it 16, is it 18? Obviously, we know here in Canada we have the legal age is 18, but you can have a parental consent and marry at the age of 16. So for me, it's more protecting the children more than anything else. So.
And we have time for one more question.
Sorry.
I was curious, is that article about the 10-year-old divorce, is that online anywhere?
Sure, it's really publicized. Actually, a French journalist made a book out of her story, and some of the profit is giving back to her and her little sister so they can go back to school. And
What would I look at for if I go to find it or something?
it's Nojoud Ali, N-O-J-O-U-D, Ali, A-L-I. And the book is called Nojoud Ali, Divorce at 10, something like that.
Thank you.
Can I just say one thing? I thought it was a really strong panel, but I just looked to ask Valentina, what's your background? Are you from Canada?
No, I'm Croatian.
Okay.
I randomly ended up in Egypt. Most expats in Egypt have some kind of story how they got there that doesn't really make sense. Mine is similar to that, but I was fortunate enough to live through a very historic moment because I moved to Egypt a year before the revolution. I was there through the revolution, and then year after, and again through this recent events this summer. So it was quite of an experience. Yeah, but mostly my background is in feminist political critique. So
very inspiring.
Thank you. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to invite you all to visit Egypt. It desperately needs to improve their economy, and unfortunately, due to the recent events and the way they're publicized, I can tell you personally, and Carol can attest to the fact that it's a lovely place. The people are quite welcoming, and it's safe, even though it doesn't seem like it is. So.
So now we'll turn it to Carol for the announcements before I leave.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah. And I'd like to thank Maria and Dan for their technical assistance with all the PowerPoints and the laptops. And thank you to all the speakers. A couple of announcements. You're going to have an hour for lunch now. The field trips this afternoon are going to be, one is leaving with the Secretariat. It's going to be 1:10, not 1 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock in your program, it says, but 1:10 will still give you enough time to get there. You're going to follow Marianne. She's going to be meeting people where the shuttle bus is right out front, and she will take you to the Secretariat for their 3 talks. You're welcome to stay for all 3. The other alternatives for field trips this afternoon are to go to the Oral History Center. That talk starts at 1:30. That building is directly across the street, and you just go to the 10th floor. There will be signs posted there. And then there's also a trip to the Holocaust Memorial Center, and that trip will be immediately following the Oral History Center trip. So that will leave at about 2:35. So we'll finish at 2:30. I'll be with you. You'll be following me for that trip. So we'll finish at the Oral History Center, and then we'll go meet anyone else we're picking up in front of the building, and we'll leave for the Holocaust Memorial. And lastly, don't forget, 5 p.m. today, there is a greenhouse tour. The students formed a greenhouse here at Concordia. It's on the 13th floor. Mysteriously, the elevator does not go to the 13th floor. So don't get lost. Go to the 12th floor and then follow the signs that go to the greenhouse and you walk up 1 flight of stairs. So that will be at 5 o'clock today. And another reminder, tomorrow the conference is at Loyola College. Be sure to bring your name tags and your little meal ticket and your coffee break ticket. And you can use your yellow shuttle pass if you are visiting. And the shuttles, again, meet right outside this building. And the conference will start at 9 o'clock tomorrow. And thank you all for coming. Enjoy your field trips, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.